Food. That is not food, the person standing in front of the cloud said. Look, food, the misty cloud transmitted, seemingly pointing at the dissolving crab beside it. That is not food. That is not a human, the man answered, narrowing his eyes. How does this look like a human to you? It's 3 meters tall, just as wide orange, and has 6 huge shears. It doesn't even have any human Zephyx. Human big, human small, human Zephyx, human food, everything food, the cloud answered. If the human were an actual human, he would be dying of frustration and rage. This was the 4th time this idiotic cloud had killed a Specter it shouldn't have. The only reason things had gotten this far was that it had also killed 2 Specters it should have killed. So it wasn't completely useless. It was a weapon that had proven effective against enemies, but with an insanely high chance of misfiring. This cloud was dumb in the dumbest way possible, so dumb that its logic was almost impossible to follow. A very smart person might believe a disguised Specter was a Specter due to a litany of suspicious signs. A smart person might believe the same disguised Specter was human, falling for a couple of subtle deceptions. A normal person might believe it was a Specter simply because they missed the subtlety and went by appearances. A dumb person might believe it was human since they never questioned it at all. An even dumber person might believe it was a Specter just because it looked too weird to be human. An even dumber person might believe it was human because Specters didn't exist and they'd never seen one before. Sometimes, things just kept switching between 1 and 0 based on intelligence. In this cloud's case, it always seemed to misunderstand something in whatever way damaged Pride's efforts most. There was always some idiotic but understandable reason why the cloud did something that any halfway intelligent Specter would call absolutely stupid. That strong human over there, obviously a Specter, it seemed cold and annoyed. That Specter, it looked human, so it was human. The cloud had to kill a big, tall, strong human. That crab was big, tall, and strong, so it could easily be a human in disguise. The more the human Specter tried to interrogate the cloud about its decisions, the more annoyed the cloud seemed at having to explain itself. These things were obvious. Since the human Specter kept asking dumb questions with obvious answers, the cloud stopped bothering to explain itself. Clearly, the human Specter would never understand the cloud's amazing, far-sighted mind. The cloud was already thinking about the food it would eat in the next few minutes, while the human Specter obviously only thought about the present. The cloud kept explaining that the crab was a human, but the human Specter just couldn't grasp this simple fact. What an idiot! Staying in this city is too risky now, the human Specter transmitted evenly to the cloud. The death of the strongest suppressed Specter in the city will cause chaos. Revenue will drop, Aegis's tribute will lower, and that will trigger an investigation. Even if we stay, we can't keep our cover under investigation. The human Specter felt like the cloud was shaking its head in annoyance. This dumb fucking human Specter. Of course, the death of a strong human would call out even stronger humans. Didn't this dumbfuck realize that before giving the cloud the idiotic order to kill the many-handed human? The human Specter could essentially read the cloud's thoughts just by looking at it, since it had picked up human body language rather quickly after staying in cities. But the only thing the Specter felt was mild annoyance that it couldn't harvest Zephyx from this place now and would need to request another mission. It was also weighing its options for the future. There was a chance Pride would blame the human Specter for the cloud's actions, given how ridiculously stupid the cloud was. Would Pride believe the human Specter was rebelling, or would she deal with the cloud instead? The outcome wasn't certain. Flee and risk being hunted down by one of Pride's servants, or hope Pride would believe the cloud was more damaging than helpful. In the end, the human Specter decided that trusting Pride one more time would be worth it. Still, if it had to keep looking after this dumb fucking cloud, it would just tell it to go to some random city and fuck off in secret. Best case, the cloud would be handed off to a different Specter, while the human Specter moved to a different city. Follow me, the human Specter said, its body turning translucent as it walked through the rusted walls of the room. The cloud followed. The two of them silently left the city where they'd stayed the last few days and flew toward an isolated cave in the wilderness, drifting through darkness and thin walls to reach a secret room with a major relay. The human Specter activated it and Pride's arrogant figure appeared. "Report," she ordered coldly. "It killed the strongest Specter in the city when I told it to kill a strong, tall human envy servant. The Specter was tall and strong, which led to a wrong identification. It had the form of a big crab," the human Specter explained. Pride remained silent for a while, then she turned to the cloud. "What did you kill?" she asked. Big, tall, strong human. How many arms did it have? More than 4. Why did you think it was a human? Pride asked. For a moment, Pride felt like she'd seen the cloud sigh in exasperation. Human big, human small, human Zephyx, human food, everything food, the cloud explained. But this time it wasn't done. It gestured toward the human Specter. It boss. It tell to kill big human dead, it complain, it stupid it. Then the cloud froze, looking back and forth between Pride and the human Specter. Its body language was so clear that Pride could essentially read its mind. Pride strong. Human Specter weak. Pride human Specter. Human Specter Pride. Pride strong. Human Specter weak. Human Specter not Pride. Human Specter lie. Human Specter weak. Human Specter Specter. Human Specter look like human. Human Specter not Specter. Human Specter human. Human traitor. Human food. Bang! An explosion of light. Stop! Pride shouted with all her authority. What? The cloud asked in confusion as the human Specter collapsed and turned to black dust. The cloud had already killed it. Pride glared at the confused cloud. She'd been suspicious of the human Specter all along. Maybe one of the other corruptors was playing dirty, or maybe it hadn't been a regular intelligent Specter at all, but one with an altered state of mind. There were a few possibilities. After all, what were the odds that a dumb Specter constantly misunderstood everything? Usually, dumb Specters did exactly what they were told, but this one seemed different. It was strange. Really dumb Specters acted on instinct like wild animals, but this one acted like it had a partially formed consciousness. That wasn't unheard of, but it put the cloud in a unique category of uselessness. Smart enough to think, but too dumb to stop that thinking from becoming overthinking, which led to the wrong choice every time. For example, how could there be water in this isolated cave? Rain couldn't fall here, so the liquid in front of it couldn't be water, even though tasting it would prove otherwise. Sadly, there wasn't much Pride could do about it. She couldn't let the cloud operate alone, and she couldn't send other Specters to supervise it without doing more harm than good. Wait here, Pride ordered. Okay, the cloud answered. The connection cut. The instant it did, Nick left the cave. He knew what was coming. Pride is going to send one of its servants to kill me. This is what I've been working toward. Nick readied himself for battle. Chapter 682. Nick waited near the cave entrance with the major relay. Everything around him was wasteland, dust, and dry rock. As always, the sun bore down with its orange light. Except for a bit of wind, nothing else moved. He'd been waiting a couple of minutes now, certain a conflict was coming soon but unsure how to play it. In the end, he decided to gamble. After more than 3 hours, something arrived. Nick's ability deactivated before he even saw the other party, but he didn't move. A full 5 minutes later it appeared. It was the robe. This was exactly what Nick had expected and bet on. Nick sent it a feeling of familiarity, letting it know he remembered it. I need to test your power, the robe transmitted calmly. Attack me with everything you have. Nick tensed not because the situation felt out of control, but because the riskiest part had arrived. This robe was extremely powerful. In a way, the corruptors' forces mirrored Aegis's. The weaker demons were essentially governors sent to control individual cities. Constraining an extremely powerful demon to a single city would waste its strength, so the strongest ones were used like agents, sent from city to handle problems. Most likely, the robe was some kind of local supervisor, probably the insurance policy for the 40 or so closest cities in case administration broke down. In general, there were more demons in the world than heroes, but turning one into a servant was rare. Most demons stayed isolated and only struck humanity when it was completely safe. Such powerful Specters were under no time pressure, which made contact with them difficult. For example, there were probably around 15 different demons living within a 50-kilometer radius of Crimson City alone. The silent area north of the city might be the territory of a fallen that only struck when an initial or early protector flew across it. So while powerful demons were everywhere, the corruptors had far fewer of them as servants than humanity had agents, because humans were united and the Specters were not. The trio of destruction and death were only 4 adversaries, yet there were over 10, maybe 20 more in the world. The envious researcher, the false prophet, the eternal hunger, the false hope, 4 more right there. Then there was the salt trident, a humongous pillar of salt shaped like a trident, deep in the ocean, constantly giving off a terrifying amount of salt. It had made the ocean so saline that almost no life could survive there, and the salt clung so stubbornly to water that it made distilling much harder, sticking even to steam. Nick had also heard of the shark mother. He'd known about the sharks attacking the coast near Crimson City's island, but not that they were scattered across the entire world. Tens of thousands of them, over 1,000 as powerful as demons, all minions of a single adversary called the Shark Mother, one of the most dangerous specters to travel near. Those were the 10 most well-known adversaries, though lesser-known ones existed too. Knowing all this made clear the true worth of the robe hovering in front of Nick. Killing it would be like wiping out a team of Aegis agents from Death's perspective, and if it died, it would likely destabilize Pride's entire territory across the north of the long continent. Nick prepared himself. The robe had told him to attack with everything he had, and the reason was obvious. It wanted him to exhaust his power until he collapsed back into a defenseless Specter core, easy to finish off. Okay, Nick transmitted. He exploded into light. Whoom! Then he attacked with everything he had. This time he didn't hold back. Crack! Nick's first 2 strikes tore 2 huge holes through the robe. Shing! He combined and widened them, cutting the robe clean in 2. A moment later, he saw one piece vibrating strangely that had to be the half holding the Specter core. Bang! He landed another hit, splitting that piece again, reducing the robe to a quarter of its original size. 2 more strikes on that fragment, and he'd hit the core. Specter cores needed a certain size, and 2 random strikes in what remained had good odds of finding it. Nick slashed forward. CRK. But his blades only scratched the surface. His ability had deactivated. The light vanished. The remaining piece of the robe shot out and wrapped around Nick's outstretched arm in an instant. He tried to turn it incorporeal again and couldn't. It was like the robe was shutting off his abilities. Cloth tentacles crept up his arm, and wherever they touched mist, it solidified, as if they were turning him corporeal. He realized he no longer had any control over that arm at all. It wasn't bound. It simply wasn't listening to him. The robe was taking control of his body. CRK. Nick's misty body tore in half, leaving his arm and a chunk of mist behind. The tentacles swarmed it, reshaping it into his entire right arm and part of his torso. A moment later, the robe flung the arm away, and it dissolved into black mist. Nick had already lost 20% of his Zephyx exploding into light, and another 20% tearing himself in 2. At least the robe had probably lost more. But that had been his one shot at surprise, and the moment had passed. The assassination had failed. Without a word, the robe expanded, trying to engulf what remained of him. With his ability deactivated, Nick could barely keep up with its speed. Whoom! He reflexively expanded his own body tenfold. The robe couldn't enclose all of it. Crack! The huge robe snapped shut around a large part of him like a pair of jaws. Nick felt his connection to that part of his body vanish entirely. Normally, if his mist form was cut in 2, he could still pull the pieces back together, remotely controlling the severed part for a while, at a steep Zephyx cost, until they fused again. That was part of what made 4 Specters so hard to capture or kill. But when the robe fully engulfed a piece of him, the connection didn't just weaken, it was gone, like the piece was no longer his at all. Luckily, he'd grown so large that he only lost another 10% of his Zephyx to the attack. But that was all he managed before the robe struck again, so much faster than him. Whoom! Nick exploded into light again, and voluntarily severed a huge chunk of his own body. Crack! The robe swallowed that piece too. At the same moment, Nick opened a maw portal beneath himself and flew through it. All told, the escape cost him another 20% of his Zephyx. An instant later, he materialized 5 kilometers away. The light vanished and the robe searched for him. Nick flew hard for the nearest cave. Before he even reached it, he felt his ability flicker off for a moment. The robe had spotted him and would come fast. Nick's mind raced for a way out. Chapter 683. Nick shot into the cave and dove straight through the ground. The instant he touched it, his ability deactivated. Already, 5 kilometers wasn't far for a Specter of the robe's power, but this was still fast. Out of reflex, Nick jumped back out of the ground and his ability reactivated. It can sense me through the ground, he realized. That explained how it had tracked him without him sensing it back. The ability probably let it detect him from much farther away than he could return the favor. His mind raced through the possibilities. His primary ability was the only thing giving him any chance of surviving this. If it deactivated, he'd die. That meant moving through walls, ground, or ceiling was off the table. Flying out into open sky was just as bad, nowhere to hide. The robe seemed to rely mainly on sight and its strange ground sense, so if he flew through open air, it would spot him and he'd have no way to escape. That left one option: get into the cave and lose the robe without ever touching it. Nick's perception stretched ahead, revealing a sprawling cave system with countless branches. He charged down into it, but as he moved, he tore off a piece of his body and flung it at the wall. It passed through like a ghost. His primary ability wavered, his strength flickering between 3 and 5 times normal, a side effect of how strangely the robe could perceive him now. It could see the severed piece, but that piece was cut off from him, and yet he could still control it remotely. Half his, half not. Less than 2 seconds later, he lost the connection to that piece entirely. In those 2 seconds, he'd recovered 30% of his Zephyx, but the robe had probably recovered just as much. The robe is more powerful, but it's not a force specter, and it doesn't have a high regeneration ability. That makes it harder for it to heal from injuries, Nick thought. A force specter's Zephyx was its health. Nick could recover to peak condition within 10 seconds. A powerful demon physical specter, by contrast, needed minutes to heal from serious injury, even with its Zephyx recovering in a couple of seconds. Nick pushed deeper into the cave network, shooting parts of himself down different branches. All of them, including his primary body, brushed the walls occasionally, so the robe couldn't tell which one was real and had to strike them one at a time. Now Nick could tell the robe moved through solid ground just like he did. Normally, only force specters could pass through packed earth and sand without disturbing it, but the robe managed the same trick. It had an oddly ethereal quality, closer to a ghost or a force specter than anything else. He sensed his primary body was next in line. One of his clouds in a neighboring branch had just been destroyed. He opened a maw portal beneath himself, shot a piece of himself down the tunnel, and sent his primary body into a different branch. Moments later, that piece was destroyed too, but not before splitting again. Soon Nick existed across 10 different caves at once. That would only buy him time. Even with just a 10% chance the robe picked the right branch and only a 10% chance it could actually kill him there, that still left a 1% chance of death on every roll, and enough rolls would eventually kill him. Worse, splitting into so many pieces cost him almost as much Zephyx as he was regenerating. He was just flailing, buying seconds against the inevitable. Stopping wasn't an option either. If he quit sending out pieces, the robe would reach him within a second and end it. Nick searched for a way out and came up empty. And he noticed something. Most of the caves either dead-ended near a certain spot or curved to avoid it, a region roughly 1 kilometer wide and 2 kilometers tall. They were nearly 3 kilometers underground, so this couldn't be the surface. Nick couldn't sense what the spot actually was, only its border. At the end of 3 caves stood walls made of something. A green material built from countless individual scales, almost like the hide of a huge snake or insect, except the uniformity was too perfect, too lacking in biological randomness to be a living thing. He felt no signs of life from it either. Still, the walls were bizarre. There's no other way out, Nick thought, approaching one of them while more of his scattered pieces were destroyed behind him. He couldn't find any point of entry, but he was out of options, so he rammed into the wall with his missed body. Bang! The wall stopped him, but when he kept pushing he noticed something. The wall was covered in small holes. How did I not see those? Moments ago, it had looked perfectly smooth. Now it seemed impossible that anyone could have thought so. The holes were about 1 centimeter wide, their interiors still smooth even as the surface between them clearly wasn't. It looked almost like some kind of filtration system. Nick wanted to understand how the holes had been hidden from his senses, but he didn't have time. He shoved himself through one and into the wall. Inside, he couldn't perceive anything more than a couple of centimeters away. Everything just looked like green wall. He could feel the sides of the hole, but the bottom never got any closer, no matter how far he traveled, as if he were falling down a 2-meter hole for dozens of meters. Physics and perception both seemed to stop making sense. What is this? He thought, still traveling down a hole that seemed infinitely deep. Seconds passed and his nerves climbed. He couldn't sense anything anymore, and he was certain the robe had already found these holes too. He had to keep moving, but moving toward what? His surroundings had stopped making sense. Everything around him felt identical, walls in every direction, perfectly encasing his misty body. He could feel them all, and no matter which way he pushed, he felt like he wasn't moving at all. Was he even moving? I don't know, he thought, staring at the encasing green world. He felt stuck, like no matter how hard he pushed, he was shoving against an indestructible wall. He tried to move. He couldn't, he was encased. Panic crept in. What is this place? I've never seen anything like it. It's not a living organism and it's not a machine either. It's definitely not natural. So what does that leave? What could it be? What is this material? He tried to analyze the smooth green walls around him. Frictionless, like the smoothest glass imaginable. If something entered this hole with no air resistance or gravity, it would just keep going forever. But that was when he noticed it. Wait, there's no air in here. Since Nick didn't need to breathe, he'd never have noticed air's presence or absence on his own. Wait, can I even feel up and down right now? He manifested a small part of his body and tried to sense if it was being pulled anywhere. Nothing. There's no gravity either, he realized. But how, where am I? Chapter 684. Nick tried to make sense of this new space. No friction, no air, no gravity. None of it added up. No material could isolate gravity. Gravity could only be cancelled by other gravity, and nothing here could be generating enough to counteract Earth's. If it were, sand from hundreds of kilometers around would already be piling up here. I should find a way out. I'm running low on Zephyx. Then Nick paused. How can I be running low? I haven't used much since entering this hole. He checked his Zephyx and realized it wasn't regenerating. He was spending it steadily and getting nothing back. Even his connection to the suffering guards around the Aegis strongholds had been cut. He wasn't generating Zephyx and he wasn't recovering it, yet his body still worked normally. That can only mean one thing. There's no prefix here. He tried to sense it. Nothing. If I don't get out of here, I'll die. What the fuck is this place? He couldn't move, and there was no way out. No friction, no gravity, no air, no prefix, no way to move, sealed in by indestructible, unknown material, Nick summarized, starting to piece together what this was. Is this a Specter trap? The holes are so small only tiny insects and 4 Specters could enter, and once inside, there's no way out. He pictured a spider trapped behind smooth glass. His Zephyx would keep dropping until he was nothing but scattered motes of it. I have to find a way out of this. First, he tried expanding his body as much as possible. It didn't work, or so it seemed. By his own senses, he hadn't expanded at all. He was still hemmed in by the same green walls. But he'd clearly lost a chunk of Zephyx doing it, which meant he had expanded. He just couldn't sense his own outer edges anymore. So I'm not actually surrounded by these walls. Something is just fooling my perception, he realized. At least I know nothing is watching me right now, since my ability's still active. There has to be a front and back to this place. Next, he deliberately released some Zephyx and tried to reabsorb it once it left his range of perception. Nothing came back, as if it stopped existing the moment it left his senses. So my body isn't really stuck, based on the expansion, but I can't retrieve Zephyx from any direction, which makes it look like I'm stuck. Both can't be true at once. I think any Zephyx not owned by a Specter gets absorbed by the walls. I already guessed this was some kind of filtration system. It wouldn't be a stretch for it to filter out neutral Zephyx too. His zephology instincts kicked in as he worked through how he designed such a trap himself. Given the small holes, this only targets 4 Specters or very small ones. Physical Specters would need to be absurdly small, since they can't resize their cores the way 4 Specters can. He wasn't sure the robe qualified. It looked more like a 2-dimensional object moving through 3-dimensional space, thin enough that it might be able to thread itself in as a long string. But then it'd be in the same bind I'm in, just with far more Zephyx and endurance to spare. Anyway, this is built for 4 Specters, pure Zephyx. A trap needs a payoff, so this is probably harvesting Zephyx. So how would I build it? First, an entrance, then a mechanism to catch whatever wanders in. The holes are the entrance, but to get a 4 Specter to actually enter them. That was when he caught the flaw in his own logic. There's no incentive at all. It looked like a smooth wall, nearly impossible to sense. I only found the holes by accident, ramming into it, and it still took real effort to squeeze through one. Whoever built this didn't want any Specter getting in, and yet there's clearly a trap here, built to kill them. The point isn't to harvest Specters, it's to keep them from reaching wherever's on the other side. This is a filter. It's filtering Specters out. That raised more questions. Why kill them then? Whoever built this is obviously advanced enough to capture Specters alive instead. No human with this kind of power would kill one if they could take it alive, unless there was a political reason. Killing a captured Specter for nothing seems like a huge waste, and I've never seen this material before, despite knowing plenty about all 5 major civilizations. So who made this? The logic of the filter kept sharpening in his mind. My perception's useless in here, and I can't refill my Zephyx. I'm meant to wander in circles until I run dry. He pictured a dark glass labyrinth. If he had to trap a blind rat with no sense of smell inside one, where would he hide the exit? I'd build one big room with a few hallways, then put the exit on the ceiling of one hallway, angled so it's nearly impossible to find by touch. The rat would need to turn randomly, for no reason, to ever stumble onto it. I might even add a door that shuts if it approaches from the wrong direction. Now translate that into something meant to catch a thing that just floats. He imagined a small opening in the middle of a big room, leading into a thin pipe to the outside. Something floating would just keep circling the edges of the room, never guessing the exit was in the middle. So how would I find that exit without being able to sense anything? He thought for a while, then it clicked. I'd use water or colored gas to trace the exit, find it by seeing where things aren't, instead of where they are. But 4 specters already are water or gas, more or less, and I can't sense my own body once it expands, and I can't shrink back to human form in a space this small. Then it hit him. This trap is built for specters for Zephyx. 4 specters might act like gas and water, but they aren't actually gas and water. He conjured a scrap of paper and pushed it away. It vanished into the walls. He pulled it back, crumpled in places, but it all came back. Excitement flared. It absorbs Zephyx but not normal matter. Whom? He summoned a huge mass of paper around himself, the easiest thing for him to conjure, since it carried almost no power in any sense. Finally, he could see where he could actually move. He pushed and pulled at the paper as he advanced, testing each direction. Sometimes pushing paper forward, he felt something press back against him, meaning that path led right back where he started. After about 30 seconds, he found a direction where he could shove endless paper through. He followed it and moments later felt his Zephyx starting to recover. The prefix was back. Then he noticed something. The paper had crinkled strangely in one spot, a place less smooth than the rest. He inspected it and found an even tinier hole, less than a millimeter wide. He'd never have spotted it without the paper, and the density of prefix there was even higher. Nick wanted to know exactly where he was. Chapter 685. By now, Nick could picture his surroundings with real confidence. A huge wall riddled with holes like a filter. At some point, each hole split into 2 unequal paths, one much smaller, off to the side rather than straight ahead, like a big street with a narrow offshoot. Anything that couldn't move without gravity, air resistance, or friction would helplessly drift down the wide hallway into a dead end built to catch intruders. Anything that could move on its own would end up there too. Since the real path forward was so small, it was nearly impossible to notice. This is clearly an exit, not an entrance. Nothing's meant to get in here. If this were a containment unit or storage space, there'd be no reason for so many holes, just one solid wall. That meant something had to pass between the 2 sides, and since the wall did everything it could to block traffic in this direction, whatever it was had to come from the other side and arrive here. But what could that be? This was deep underground inside a random cavern. Water, air, earth. Of course not. The surroundings looked completely ordinary. Normal air quality, no strange life forms adapted to some exotic atmosphere, nothing unusual at all. Normally, Nick would have no idea what was meant to come through, but the density difference in the prefix told him exactly what. I would prefix be denser in the small hole. A smaller hole held less prefix, but it was also smaller. Density shouldn't change from that alone. Density only rose under compression, and prefix was notoriously hard to compress. It was far more cost-efficient to convert prefix into Zephyx than to compress prefix to Zephyx-like density. On top of that, Zephyx held enormous stored energy, making it valuable, while prefix held almost none. Zephyx was fuel, prefix was water. You'd have to split water into hydrogen and oxygen to get energy out of it, and that split cost as much energy as the reaction produced. Nobody split water into hydrogen when they could just swap a barrel of it for oil by setting it next to a Specter for a while. So the higher prefix density in that little hole told Nick this was almost certainly what traveled through it. There'd be no point compressing prefix otherwise. The only reason was to push more of it through, faster, under pressure. Prefix, he thought, compressing himself further. People, even extractors, rarely talked about it. It was useless to ordinary people who didn't need it to survive and couldn't use it for anything. It just existed. Its only purpose was letting veterans and stronger Specters stay alive and rebuild their Zephyx reserves. Even extractors barely mentioned it, since it was simply everywhere, all the time, in water, air, stone, any gap no matter how tiny. You needed materials like steel or glass to isolate it. And yet it surrounded everyone always, more omnipresent than air or light. But nobody knew where it came from. Nick had learned the relationship between Prefix and Zephyx from Wintor back in the Dregs, common knowledge. But even now, knowing more about the world than Arya Light or Marcus Julius, he had no idea where the world's Prefix actually originated. One thing was clear. It had to come from somewhere, and its presence kept increasing over time. The reason was Specters. When one died, a number of hatchlings appeared worldwide, roughly balancing things out, but those hatchlings grew stronger. A Specter's death never produced 0 new Specters. It produced at least 1, and usually 2 or more. That meant the total number of Specters kept rising, and their combined power never shrank, since 99% of the world's Zephyx sat locked in Eternals and adversaries. New Fallen and adversaries kept appearing too, meaning more and more Zephyx was being locked away in Specter form. But the crazy part, Prefix density never dropped. This wasn't like the water cycle, rain falling and rising and falling again with the total mass never changing. Prefix was actually increasing. So where did it come from? Nobody knew, but every researcher wanted to. Stop the creation of Prefix, and killing Specters would stop spawning more of them. Stop its production entirely, and every Specter on Earth might eventually be wiped out. Nick looked at the tiny hole. Hard to believe this might be one of the places Prefix actually came from. Eventually, he compressed himself enough to fit through it, not easily. As a human, even with his mist ability, this would have been impossible. Only something like a powerful Force Specter could manage it. He pushed into the hole and immediately felt pressure trying to shove him back out, the Prefix ahead of him pushing back. Luckily, with so many other holes spread across the wall, the pressure wasn't strong enough to force him out. He kept moving. The robe might fit through the bigger hole, but I doubt it'd fit through this one, he thought, the robe still on his mind. I don't know if it died in one of the traps or already got out. If it escaped, I need to be careful. It'll either wait for me or go straight to Pride about this wall. Either way, my cover's probably blown. Leaving through the same hole is risky if it's waiting. Might be smarter to exit through a different hole on the far side of this space. He kept moving forward and after a few meters noticed his perception returning. Looking back, the green wall still felt close behind him. Looking forward, it was still there, but much farther away. The perception warping is weakening, he realized. He kept going, and eventually his perception reached far enough to see past the hole entirely. What he saw outside took a while to process. What is this? No human civilization built this. I refuse to believe it. The space beyond was in constant motion, green and red plates, something like chitin, moving rhythmically, pulled and pushed by thin strands that looked almost like transparent muscle. Thin veins ran through those strands, feeding every part of them with something. In a way, it looked alive. And yet there was zero randomness anywhere in its construction, perfect, uniform, as if engineered down to the genetics. Watching the motion, Nick understood. This was a gigantic machine, built from purely biological parts with none of biology's usual randomness. A gigantic, perfectly engineered lifeform acting like a machine, he thought. It's alive, but it has no brain, no soul, nothing like that. It's not even as intelligent as a cell. It's a biological machine. Chapter 686. Nick studied the machine for a long time. The Prefix inside the chamber was far denser than outside, insanely so. Is this really where Prefix comes from? He crept toward the exit of the small hole and looked around, but even with his frighteningly fine senses, he could only make out a few meters in any direction. The machine was too compact, its moving parts leaving almost no open space to see through. It was also deafeningly loud, its grinding noise ruining any attempt at echolocation. His perception still relied on his core senses. He could spot an ant from 100 kilometers off, but only with a clear line of sight. He could map a room in 3 dimensions from sound bouncing off the walls, but with everything this loud, the picture was pure chaos. He could read surfaces by touch, but everything here vibrated constantly. He could trace people or specters who'd passed through weeks or months ago by scent, but everything here smelled identical. This machine was loud in every sense he had. It probably even tasted loud, though he wasn't about to test that. He carefully slipped out of the tiny hole and found dozens more scattered around it. The moment he left, the Prefix density climbed even higher, probably 5 times denser here than outside. Compressing it to this level likely cost over 1,000 times its weight in Zephyx. Like everything else, Prefix obeyed entropy, and fighting entropy always cost energy. The pressure in here is forcing Prefix out through these tiny holes. It's probably being produced right here. But how? What's fueling it? Energy can't be created or destroyed, everything comes from somewhere. Even when I conjure something, I'm just converting Zephyx into matter, both forms of the same energy. Prefix is energy too, so it has to come from something. It can't just appear out of nothing. Nick knew he'd stumbled onto something enormous, one of Earth's deepest secrets. I'm about 95% sure this machine is what's producing the prefix around here. And probably not the only one. I doubt a single machine supplies the whole world. There are likely several more scattered around, all pumping prefix into the atmosphere. But why? What's the point? If I just follow the logic, specters want to cause humanity suffering. Prefix creates specters. Therefore, prefix causes humanity suffering. But that's too clean, right? Suffering's usually a side effect, not the goal. When one city hurts another, it's for resources or conquest. The suffering's incidental. Suffering as the actual goal only fits sadism or revenge, and neither explains something affecting all of humanity for thousands of years. And the skeptics have a point too. If prefix exists to make us suffer, why does it also make us so much stronger? He shook his misty head. I should look around first. He studied the machine's moving parts more closely. Finally, all that biology is going to pay off, he thought, eyeing the transparent, muscle-like membranes. Not my specialty, but I know enough to guess. He spotted clear lines running through one membrane. Those look like blood vessels, but they're not carrying blood, some clear liquid or gas that powers the muscle instead. With just enough open space around him, Nick shifted into his human form for the first time in a while. Tried to breathe. Nothing. No air, he realized, glancing down. But gravity's back, so it was only switched off inside the holes. He frowned. That means the holes probably aren't some kind of portal off Earth. Something in the wall itself is isolating or canceling gravity. He sighed. I can't even imagine how that would work. Gravity's the bending of spacetime. To be isolated from it, you need to be unaffected by that bending, which basically means not being part of spacetime at all. And that makes no sense, since I can still move. You need space to move. He approached one of the clear membranes. This one spins the plates below it. Biology doesn't usually do spinning parts. He touched it lightly. Right, low stress, good for testing. Not wanting to alert whatever built this by damaging it, he was careful not to interfere with the machine's actual function. He conjured a small syringe from basic materials and pressed it to the membrane, squeezing gently. He squeezed harder. Tough. This muscle could probably lift several tons without tearing, but still squishy. He pushed the syringe in, applying real force, and only managed a shallow cut before the tip snapped under the strain. All right, he said, drawing on more Zephyx. Over the next few minutes he built a second syringe, this one made from the same material as his weapon. Forging something that hard meant emptying and refilling his Zephyx reserves several times. Luckily, the dense prefix here made recovery quick. Round 2. He pushed the new syringe into the membrane. This time it slid in cleanly. He guided it toward one of the vessels and drew out a sample, then pulled it free and examined it. Clear liquid, a little like water, a little oily. Is it glowing? He narrowed his eyes and, focusing, confirmed it gave off a faint light. He studied it for a minute, then conjured a small glass scale and dripped some onto it. It looked much like water or oil, aside from the glow. About 3 times as dense as water. He kept examining it. It doesn't seem to evaporate. Maybe the lack of air. Wait, wouldn't that make it evaporate faster? He paused. Interesting. Aside from prefix, this is a vacuum, and prefix doesn't behave like normal matter, so this is essentially a true vacuum. The pressure inside the membrane and the syringe is way higher than out here, but despite that brutal pressure change, it's acting exactly the same. After a few more tests, he decided to push further and touch the liquid with a finger. The instant it made contact, CRRR. His eyes went wide as his body began rapidly turning to white dust, starting from the fingertip. Bang! He turned to mist and severed the affected part instantly. A moment later, the cut-off piece finished dissolving into white dust and vanished. Panic seized him. I almost died. This tiny bit of liquid turned half my body to white dust in under a tenth of a second. White dust, not black. Specters turn to black dust when they die, not white. Why white, and why did something this small nearly kill me? He looked at the machine, and the liquid pulsing through its muscles. This place was far more dangerous than he'd expected. Chapter 687. Nick's Zephyx recovered and he shifted back to human form, still watching the water-like substance. He dropped the scale mid-panic. The liquid now lay motionless on the ground, inert as water. He studied it from a distance, in no hurry to touch it bare-handed again. This is obviously the energy source for the membranes for the whole machine. It's what makes all of this move. He watched the membranes a while longer. It's not being used up especially fast or slow. Moving these plates at this rate needs a certain amount of energy, and going by how little liquid gets consumed, it's not very energy-dense. That drop on the scale was maybe a gram's worth of Zephyx. My body holds over 10 kilos, over 10,000 times richer in energy than that liquid. Even with some extreme destructive property, there just isn't enough of it to have done what it did to me, and yet it clearly did. Even stranger, the liquid didn't lose any energy in the process, still just as much as before it touched me, so there's no equalization happening here. He stared at it in silence. It's like it infected me, like it's a lit match and I'm a kilometer of rope. The match doesn't hold anywhere near as much stored energy as the rope, but if it catches, that doesn't matter. It's still the reason the whole rope burns. Then there's the white dust. When a Specter dies, it turns to black dust, its Zephyx converting back into prefix. But this liquid turned part of me to white dust. Did it convert into something else instead? What though? I only know prefix and Zephyx. Sure, Zephyx breaks down into a few subcategories, but none fit here. So did it become something that's neither? He frowned. I don't know, hard to accept. One thing's certain, I'm not touching that liquid bare-handed again. He approached it and drew some back into his syringe, watching it behave exactly like water. Then he extended his arm and slowly began turning to mist again. As long as he was wearing or holding something and kept it under his control, he could carry it into mist form too. Otherwise, he'd end up naked every time he transformed. He wanted to see whether the syringe and the liquid inside it would survive the transition or destroy him again. The syringe turned to mist along with him. CRRR. He severed the affected part on instinct the moment it started turning to white mist. This time he'd been ready, so only a small piece needed cutting away. The syringe dropped to the ground. Crack. And shattered. His eyes widened. This was made from the same material as my weapon. It shouldn't break from a 1.5-meter fall. He examined the spilled liquid. Nothing had visibly changed. Wait, not nothing. It's dimmer than before. He frowned. That tracks. Luminescence is a form of energy loss. Anything that glows long enough eventually stops. So it's shedding energy, meaning it's not fully stable. Its behavior doesn't shift across environments, so it's stable in that sense, but it's steadily bleeding energy, judging by how much it's dimmed in just a couple of minutes, so its stability itself isn't very high. He turned to the broken syringe and inspected it. Fortunately, he understood this material completely. He'd needed to conjure it in the first place. After a bit of testing, he found the answer. All the Zephyx had drained out of it. Powerful materials needed to be infused with Zephyx to gain their properties, the same way infusing iron with carbon made steel. Plain steel was just iron and carbon in the right ratio. Strip the carbon back out, and it reverted to iron far weaker. So the liquid turned this material back to its base form, which isn't impressive to begin with. Base materials for Zephyx-infused gear are never very strong on their own. Carbon alone isn't especially hard either, unless arranged just right. Which means I'm not sure I can even carry a sample out of here. The material's only stable for a couple of minutes, and there aren't many things strong enough to hold a liquid like this while still fitting through a hole 1 millimeter wide. He shook his head. I won't be bringing Aegis a sample. He turned to look at the wall behind him. And I doubt any human could even get in here. Even if there were a real entrance, whatever built this machine surely has more safeguards in place. The 4 Specter trap in the filter alone is strong enough to handle demons, maybe even fallen. He looked back at the machine, constant motion, barely any open space. A normal machine would just be gears, cables, wires. This one was built from chitin, clear membranes, clear vessels, clear tubing instead. Despite everything he knew about physics and zephology, he couldn't guess what any single component actually did. None of it followed any principle of engineering he recognized. He shifted back to mist and approached it. I want to look around more, just carefully, no touching. A human couldn't fit through these gaps, but mist slipped through without trouble. He pushed into the churning machine. Everything around him was loud, constantly moving. Fortunately, whatever built it was efficient enough that none of the liquid leaked out, so brushing against parts of the machine wouldn't turn him to dust. He drifted through it for several minutes. A normal person would have lost all sense of direction by now, but his mind was sharp enough to hold an accurate map. It's huge, he thought, studying that map. By now he'd crossed to the far side, about 1.5 kilometers away, where the walls again showed only tiny holes. He decided to trace the machine's outer wall. It's egg-shaped, he realized. I'm at the wide bottom, 1.5 kilometers across. The whole thing's probably 3 kilometers tall. I've never seen a machine this dense or this enormous. The technician's machine is a toy next to this. After a while he went to check the top. Flying upward, he slowed. Something felt wrong. The prefix density is dropping fast. It's actually lower here than outside. He felt a creeping unease. There was no real reason for it. Losing access to prefix wouldn't kill him instantly, and he could always retreat to somewhere it was denser. This was far less dangerous than the four Specter trap, and yet he felt more uneasy here than he had trapped inside it. Still, he pushed himself to keep flying. All the prefix vanished, and he saw a wide gap ahead in the machine's structure. He felt an urge to breathe deep and fast, despite not breathing at all, a familiar feeling he couldn't place until it clicked. It feels like drowning, like inhaling water, like taking in something I can't use. He decided to glance through the gap and pull back immediately. He approached and looked through. His eyes went wide with shock. What? Chapter 688. It took Nick a while to process what he was seeing. A sizable open space stretched ahead, the chaotic machine forming its floor a churning carpet of insect-like parts. In the middle of that space sat a 10-meter-wide white plate, its material impossible to identify at a glance. Stranger still, the plate was lit by a brilliant white beam falling from the center of the ceiling. And on the ceiling, the sun. He could see it, but how? Even this close to the top, there should still be hundreds of meters of earth and stone overhead. And why was the light white instead of dark orange? The sun itself looked wrong too, smaller than usual and not directly above him but above the opening instead. Normally the sun always sat directly above whoever perceived it, which should have made it invisible to him here, off to the side of the hole. And it was white, not orange, blindingly so. Looking at it felt like looking at the blinding light all over again, bright enough, he sensed, to damage a normal person's eyes. Something cracked inside his mind, and parts of his body began turning to black dust. He wheeled around and fled back into the machine's depths. After a while the black dust stopped, and his body began recovering. What was that? Too many questions. Why did the sun look so different? Why had his body started converting to prefix? What was that light? Why wasn't the sun positioned above him? The only other time he'd seen the sun change at all was when the new champion of light appeared. Every other time it had been utterly consistent. But this had felt different. Where the normal sun read as calm, somber, constant, this one had felt aggressive, dominating, chaotic, almost like it hated him and wanted him dead. That couldn't be literally true. If the sun actually wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. Nothing could resist something that powerful. Was it the light itself? He didn't think so. He'd felt weak and uncomfortable before he even saw it. The light had only intensified an effect already underway. But it's connected to whatever's hurting me. There has to be some secondary force around that light doing the damage. Isn't a place for specters. The filters held 4 specter traps. The machine ran on a liquid that turned specters to white dust on contact. And now the top of the machine seemed to convert specters into prefix outright. Yet none of these things, aside from the trap, seemed purpose-built to kill specters. Otherwise he'd be dead already. They simply existed, and that was the terrifying part. Their mere existence was enough to threaten his life, like being a paper bird inside a burning house. Is this force the fuel for the prefix? He couldn't imagine another way fuel could reach the machine for that conversion. The white light's probably just a visible sign of the force. I felt weak before I even saw it, so the force itself must already have been present. It has to be the sun, he thought. The sun delivers whatever this force is to the machine, and the machine turns it into prefix. His thoughts spiraled. The sun wasn't just the strongest specter, it might be the actual reason specters existed at all. It fed the machine that produced the prefix that spawned them. Destroy the sun, and the machine loses its fuel, and the endless cycle of new specters stops. Is this how the sun causes suffering? It's a specter, and specters grow stronger by causing suffering. If the sun creates the specters that cause that suffering, then the sun is the true source of it. Every specter represents some facet of humanity's suffering, but none of them, except me, grow stronger from suffering in general. What if the sun is like me? What if it grows more powerful from suffering itself, and it's using all the specters as its instruments? An idea struck him. Doesn't that make every specter technically the sun's minion? But then, is the sun really even a specter? What if it's something else entirely? He mulled it over. Not enough information, he admitted. Could be right, could be wrong, could just be some kind of meta-specter or simply an extremely powerful one. He sat with everything he'd seen. The liquid that behaved normally yet turned him to white dust, the impossible architecture, the fact that prefix was manufactured here at all, the sun looking different, the force that had hurt him just by proximity. Too many clues, none of them fitting together. And a memory surfaced from decades past. About 50 years ago, in a ruin from the ancient ones in Crimson City, He'd seen diagrams on old monitors in some kind of control room, a sphere ringed by a circle, a smaller ball beside it, text flickering on the screen. He knew the Ancient One's language now, but couldn't recall what that text had actually said. That was all that remained of the memory. Most of it seemed to have been lost during his consumption's memory purge. He gripped his head in frustration. Why did I have to lose that part? If anyone could explain where Specters came from, it would be the Ancient Ones. Fuck. Useless. Something important is in there, but it's all too blurry. By now he'd reached the filter he'd entered through, and he looked back at the machine one last time. Still working. Nothing had changed. He checked the membrane he'd drawn liquid from earlier, already healed. That's one perk of organic machines. They repair themselves. He looked at the liquid pooled on the ground. Dull now. Looks like it spent all its energy. He crouched and carefully touched it. Nothing. He rolled it between two fingers, just viscous, nothing more. Thicker water, essentially. I can touch it safely now, which confirms it wasn't the liquid itself that hurt me, it was the energy it carried. That energy vanishes within a few minutes and I can't tell where it goes. I saw it glow, but I never felt any of that energy entering the surrounding air. It just disappears. He looked back at the machine one more time. So many questions raised, so few answered. But he was certain of one thing: this machine was a critical clue to the world's greatest mystery, the existence of Specters, the origin of Prefix, the purpose behind all of it. Why did the sun create Prefix? Who built this machine? Why did Prefix become Specters? What was that strange force? I can't learn anything more here, he decided, looking toward the filter. I need to get back to Aegis and report to the technician. He frowned. I just hope the robe died in one of the traps. Chapter 689. Finally, Nick decided to leave the Great Hall and its machine behind, more questions raised than answered. He shifted back to mist and slipped through one of the tiny holes, moving carefully this time. He knew what to expect now and took no chances. After about 30 seconds, he reached the larger hole and turned left. This time the path was easier. He tracked the Prefix trail through the surroundings and followed it straight toward the exit. Just 20 seconds later, his perception expanded enough to confirm he was nearing the filter's exit, and he spotted it almost immediately, surging out through the hole. His ability stayed active. The robe wasn't here. Still, he couldn't be certain of its state. It might be waiting somewhere deeper in the cave. It spent somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes total inside the holes in the machine, not long. The robe could still be stuck in the trap, or it could have escaped already, or never entered at all. Conjuring a major relay takes real time in Zephyx. There's no way it had time to reach Pride in just a few minutes, he thought. There's a major relay in the cave, but that's several kilometers off, and it can't operate one there while also watching this area. Most likely, if it's not stuck, it's waiting nearby to keep watch. If so, it'll find me eventually. If not, none of this matters anyway. No point delaying the inevitable. He reached toward a wall and slid a mist tendril in. His ability deactivated. It's here. He spun and lunged back toward one of the holes. The moment his tendril left the wall, his ability flickered back on, then died again almost instantly. The robe had reached the cave fast and caught him entering. It morphed into a long tendril and shot into the same hole after him, never losing sight of him. It couldn't manipulate the hole's strange walls, but that hardly mattered. The passage ran straight, with nowhere to hide. Within a second, it closed the distance. The speed gap was so vast that Nick had barely managed a few meters into the hole before the robe's tendril split and slithered toward him along the walls, ready to consume him whole. Then something thin and glinting flashed from within his mist and shot toward the robe, an impossibly slender needle. So fragile it shattered the instant one end brushed the tunnel wall. Bang! The robe plowed straight through the debris, ignoring it. Whoom! Its body erupted into white dust. The needle had actually been an ultra-thin glass vial, and the tiny bit of liquid inside had burst across nearly its entire body on impact. The robe registered what was happening, but its situation bore no resemblance to Nick's earlier brush with the liquid. Nick's ability had been active then, matching the robe's own speed. He could sever pieces of himself instantly, being a force specter. He'd known exactly what he was about to touch and braced for it, and he'd only made contact with a single fingertip, and even then, he'd barely split his body away in time. The robe had none of those advantages. In its place, Nick knew, even he wouldn't have been able to save himself. Just as expected, the robe dissolved into a cloud of white dust that kept surging toward Nick for a moment longer. He shed the last 10% of his own body in response, sacrificing it to white dust as well, but that piece did exactly its job, slowing the wave enough that once his ability reactivated, he could outrun it until it finally dispersed and vanished. Before reaching the tiny hole back into the machine, he stopped and looked back. It was over, the robe was dead. Finally, he thought, letting himself calm down. That was either a fast peak demon or a slow initial fallen, given how easily it reshaped into something small and agile, probably a peak demon. I'm strong, but not strong enough to kill something a full level above me outright. He wanted to sigh, lucky I had that liquid. It hadn't stayed potent for more than 5 minutes, but that had been enough. Before leaving the machine, he'd conjured an impossibly thin vial and filled it with a bit more of the liquid, a delicate, dangerous process. The vial's walls had needed to be under 0.5 millimeter thick to pass through the tiny filter, yet sturdy enough to survive the inertia of the trip. He couldn't turn the vial to mist, but he could carry it physically. As long as his own Zephyx never touched its contents, he'd be safe. Even so, threading it through that tiny hole had been nerve-wracking. One accidental tap against the wall, and the whole thing would have detonated, killing him instantly. To buy himself a sliver of margin, he'd made the vial just 0.7 millimeters wide, barely wider than a human hair, its walls only a touch thicker than one. Something that fragile could shatter at the slightest provocation. But every bit of the risk had paid off. He'd killed a peak demon, dealt real damage to pride. But I'm not done yet, he thought. I need to tell the technician about the machine, but the mission comes first. I have to stick to the plan. He waited for the last of the white dust to disperse before leaving the filter. Once outside, he touched the wall again, his ability held steady this time. The robe was probably stuck in the trap for a while, just not as long as I was, he reasoned. It likely reached the end of the hole and had to find its own way out. Lucky for it, it's a physical Specter, not a force Specter. My body lost its connection to the cutoff piece once it expanded, but that shouldn't apply the same way to a physical Specter. It probably just filled the whole trap until it found the exit. Makes sense, this trap targets force Specters, not physical ones. Some very small physical Specters might squeeze into the filter, but I doubt many could shrink enough to fit the true entrance to the machine itself. There's a big gap between a centimeter and a millimeter, and they'd still have to find that tiny hole in the first place. Most likely, it was stuck for 5 minutes at most before getting out, then waited for me. After checking his surroundings, he shifted back into his physical form. A moment later, he activated his black barrier to send a message. It took barely 2 seconds. Then he turned to mist again and flew for the cave system's exit. Moments later, he was outside, paying no attention to his surroundings as he made straight for the major relay. Once there, he activated it immediately. He just hoped Pride would answer. Chapter 690. The major relay took a while to connect to Pride, unusual. Probably because Nick had never called her directly before. Every other time, some other Specter had opened the connection. Accepting an unknown call was risky, since holding a connection open let the other side roughly trace your direction. A single trace wouldn't pin down a corruptor, but 2 or 3 together could narrow one to a small area. Nick waited, hoping she'd pick up. When the stone at the front of the relay finally shifted shape, he knew she had. It reformed into Pride, who studied him with narrowed eyes. "Attack, cloth attack," Nick transmitted. She just stared back, not bothering to hide her disgust. The robe had obviously attacked Nick, and somehow, Nick had beaten it and then called to tattle on the traitorous robe, with no idea it had simply been following her orders. Still, she was puzzled. How had he dealt with it? Where was it now? She was confident he wasn't some spy planted by a rival corruptor. Trading false information about each other's servants was taboo among them, since it would give every other corruptor license to do the same, likely aimed right back at whoever started it. And despite their rivalries, their masters still worked together, allies in practice if not in spirit. More than that, this cloud of mist was a force Specter, and the mere fact it could communicate at all already made it one of the most intelligent ones in existence. No force Specter was smart enough to fake being a spy convincingly. That alone was why she'd accepted the call. "What happened?" she asked. "Me greet, cloth told me attack, I attack, cloth attack, I run, cloth follow, I find green place, I enter green place, cloth enter green place, I confused, I fly around, I find exit, cloth no exit, cloth still there, me here," Nick explained. So the robe was stuck somewhere. "What is this green place?" she asked. "Green wall, weird wall, no hole, suddenly hole, I go in, I no see, wall everywhere, I stuck, I fly, I no stuck." Pride studied him for a while. She'd never heard of anything like this. She understood the words well enough, but his account seemed to contradict itself at points. Not that this meant he was lying. More likely, he was simply too dumb to make sense of what he'd experienced. "Is the robe still in this green space?" I don't know, dangerous, no energy. No energy, elaborate. I fly around, I confuse. No energy, lose energy, I lose energy, I can't more energy. Energy gone, I nearly die. Her eyes narrowed. Are you saying you can't produce Zephyx in the green space? Yes, Zephyx forgot. That concerned her. Where is this place? There, Nick transmitted, shaping part of his body into a pointing finger. How far? Not far, seconds. She fell silent for a moment. The robe is in a hole. Yes, hole in green wall, weird hole, dangerous hole. How big? Nick shaped his misty body to demonstrate. That was worrying, barely a centimeter wide. Only 4 Specters and a handful of physical Specters could fit through something that small. Pride weighed the odds that the robe was still alive. Maybe, maybe not. Sending a rescuer felt too risky. Whoever went might fall victim to the wall too if they moved carelessly under time pressure. But she also wanted to know what this green wall actually was. Wait, she ordered. Someone will come to you. Okay. The connection cut. Nick didn't have to wait long this time. After just 40 seconds, the ground shook, and a fountain of human hands burst upward, reshaping themselves into a worm-like body with 2 massive claws. It turned to look at the major relay, then at Nick. Nick could tell instantly this was a Fallen. The number of Fallen serving any one corruptor almost never reached double digits. Pride and War, currently expanding their territories, probably had high single digits each. Envy and Gluttony likely had 3 or 4 apiece. Envy might not even have one, given how little it could threaten anyone with its own power. Lust and Sloth probably sat somewhere in between. Every Fallen was precious, reserved for direct confrontation with Aegis. The weakest servants scouted cities and established small footholds. Nick had run into some of them back in Crimson City, under Envy. Once a servant flagged a city as ready for the taking, the corruptor sent someone who specialized in infiltration, usually a fanatic or a weak demon. Once a city was firmly in hand, a demon came to harvest its Zephyx. Late and peak demons acted like agents, overseeing whole regions of cities, stepping in when needed and dealing with troublesome caravans or wandering heroes. The Fallen were the special forces. Their job was pressuring Aegis directly, killing agents and disrupting intelligence gathering. They rarely interacted with cities at all, mostly waiting on orders or trailing a team of agents, sometimes a protector. Fallen probably did more damage to Aegis than the adversaries did. Adversaries were stronger and more threatening, sure, but clashes between adversaries and shields or protectors were rare. One adversary or shield was worth more than 20 protectors or Fallen, so losing even one was devastating enough that both sides moved carefully. Fallen, in total, caused far more damage simply through volume. And now one stood in front of him. Lead me to the green wall, the massive hands transmitted. Nick flew out of the cave with it trailing behind, into another cave, until the Fallen could see the wall for itself. They stopped in front of it. There is no hole, it said. No touch, no hole. Touch hole, Nick answered, approaching the wall, then shrank and vanished from view. The Fallen, of course, could tell Nick wasn't strong enough to vanish from its perception on his own. This was the wall's doing. It crept closer and extended one long claw, feeling along the surface. Rough to the touch, smooth to the eye. One of the tiny hands making up the claw found a fingertip's way into what seemed like an invisible hole. See, Nick transmitted, emerging again. The Fallen probed further, then wordlessly pulled several stones from its own body. It carried its own major relay, and opened a connection to Pride, who studied the wall in silence. She'd never seen anything like it. Chapter 691. Pride studied the wall for a long while. At a glance, it looked like metal or some kind of chitin, but closer inspection revealed something stranger. There are no holes, she transmitted. The holes only appear when I touch the wall, the Fallen answered. Can you fit inside? About 5 meters, that's my limit. Anything different at that depth? The atmosphere thins, gravity seems to lower. Gravity is lowering. I believe so. She frowned at the wall. Nick naturally heard none of this. How hard is it? She asked. I can't damage it. Her eyes narrowed. Not even one of her strongest servants could scratch it. That put this wall on par with Aegis headquarters, something only shields or adversaries could hope to damage. Is it alive? No signs of life. Then humans built it, she concluded. Only humans build things this large and this resilient. The Fallen said nothing. It was a servant, and centuries of experience had taught it to speak only when Pride wanted to hear something. Unprompted talk risked looking like an attempt to climb above its station, which had a way of earning more dangerous assignments. Pride demanded constant, quiet deference. Search for an actual entrance. Call me if you find one. Yes. The connection cut. The Fallen glanced at Nick. Pride hadn't said what to do with him. Wait here, it commanded. Nick had no idea what it intended. Okay, he answered. Waiting seemed safest. The Fallen burrowed into the ground and vanished. Nick waited and waited and waited. After more than 10 minutes it resurfaced. What's in the hole? Nick repeated what he'd told Pride. As he spoke, the Fallen pushed several tiny arms into the holes but couldn't reach far. Still, Nick's account lined up with what it sensed. The Fallen had no eyes, navigating instead through an extremely sensitive sense of touch. When it extended part of itself into a hole, it could feel the end just a couple of meters in. Normally it wouldn't have questioned that, but with Nick's testimony in mind, it noticed the wall's placement didn't add up spatially. The end of the hole seemed to creep backward the deeper its arm reached. Combined with the illusion hiding the holes from the outside, something was clearly off. Go into the hole, it ordered. Hole dangerous, Nick answered. The Fallen's pressure spiked. Bang! One claw swept through Nick's misty body, scattering it across the cave. Go into the hole or I will kill you. The mist regathered. Okay, Nick answered, drifting into one of the holes. So it has no ability to suppress force specters, he noted, considerably calmer now. Being near a Fallen was genuinely dangerous, but he'd gambled correctly that extracting real information from this hole would prove too difficult for anyone but him. When he'd explored the machine's chamber, he'd found no entrance anywhere, not even at the top, where hundreds of meters of rock and dirt should have blocked the view entirely. Whatever built this almost certainly didn't use a conventional entrance. If they wanted to observe the machine, they likely arrived the same way sunlight did, through some kind of portal. And the destructive force near the top would surely have leaked into the surroundings by now if it weren't fully isolated. Someone would have noticed. The fact that the Fallen had come back to interrogate him meant it had learned nothing useful on its own. That made Nick the only one, or at least the nearest one, capable of extracting information from this place. A few very small physical specters might manage it eventually, but they'd have to reach this location first. For now, he was the best option available, which was exactly why he hadn't fled the moment the Fallen left to search for an entrance. The fact that it had no attack that could properly target a force specter made it far less dangerous to him than the robe had been. All it could really do was scatter his body, costly in Zephyx, and dangerous if it managed to keep him from ever regathering. But that would take time and only worked if he tried to reform in one place like a typical force specter. He had no intention of doing that. He'd simply scatter in every direction, forcing it to guess, and unlike the robe, this thing couldn't hunt down his will across separate clouds. It wouldn't know which piece was the real one until that piece was kilometers away and had time to vanish or recover. Nick was reasonably safe. About 5 meters in, he looked back at the Fallen blocking the entrance. "Am inside. Go further and report what you see." He did, and it watched him pass the apparent end of the hole. Moments later he returned. Wall everywhere. It pressed him further, and he kept giving the same confusing answer. It sent him back in again and again. After almost 30 minutes he emerged once more, the hole no clearer than before. This time the Fallen contacted Pride directly. "This sounds like an old trap for force specters," she said. "Most likely built by one of the destroyed civilizations." She glanced at Nick. "The only reason it didn't work on the cloud is that it's stupid, but not as stupid as an ordinary force specter." "Is there no way to learn more about this place?" she asked. "I've tried everything in my power," the Fallen answered. She sneered, "Useless." Her attention shifted to the cloud. "Kill it." "I'm sorry, but I don't think I can," it answered. "It knows it's safe from me inside the hole, and I can't kill it fast enough elsewhere. It's grown more careful around me too. I don't think it'll expose its core again." Her disgust deepened. "You're telling me you can't kill a specter 2 levels below you?" "Yes." She fell silent, studying the cloud. She had no servant capable of finishing it. So what if she couldn't kill it? What real damage would that do? She'd already registered it as one of her servants, meaning no other corruptor would take it in. It couldn't communicate with humans, and even if it could, it barely understood who she even was. Letting it go changed nothing. It would just keep flying around, killing people at random. And yet the idea infuriated her. This pathetic, half-witted cloud, not even a proper demon, had caused her more trouble than any servant she'd ever had. And now she was powerless to punish it. The disrespect of it. She refused to accept that a thing like this could make one of the 7 corruptors look powerless. "I'll deal with the cloud myself," she transmitted to the fallen and cut the connection. Chapter 692. After Pride cut the connection, Nick studied the fallen beside him. He hadn't heard any of the exchange and couldn't guess what she was planning. He waited in silence, working through it. It isn't interacting with me at all. If Pride had given it orders concerning me, it would be moving or talking to me. She can't order it to kill me here. Either, we all know it wouldn't manage that while I'm standing beside the wall. The only way to kill me would be to lure me away from it, and it isn't trying that. If they wanted to drop this whole matter, it would just leave. If they wanted to use me, it would be talking to me right now, or trying to get me to move. Instead, it's just standing here doing nothing. Pride didn't seem distracted either. The only thing she really focused on during that whole conversation was me. She seemed genuinely annoyed that she couldn't touch me. Is she actually going to? I considered the possibility in theory. I didn't think it would actually happen. Is she coming here to kill me herself? I think so. If she'd sent someone else, the fallen wouldn't need to wait. She trusts that I'll follow orders and would just tell me to stay put. She might really be coming here herself. Nick stayed silent and waited. If Pride actually showed up, he'd be all but helpless. Every corruptor was a peak fallen and stronger than any ordinary peak fallen at that. They were ancient, almost certainly alive since the era of the Suffering Ones, possibly even the Enlightened Ones, which put them at a couple thousand years old at minimum. Not even shields lived that long. Only Specters could. Though the odds they'd lived through the Enlightened Ones' era were low. That civilization had been terrifyingly powerful and advanced, likely the closest anyone had ever come to wiping out Specters entirely. The evidence wasn't conclusive, but it suggested they'd captured at least a couple of adversaries, and that the Maw had only risen to power during the later era of the Suffering Ones. Meaning, the Enlightened Ones weren't limited to just 7 shields. Humanity currently had over 10 peak protectors ready to ascend, but blocked by the Maw's cap. With 10 more shields, the balance of power between humans and Specters wouldn't be nearly as lopsided as it was now, where a single city had to fight tooth and nail just to survive. If Nick hadn't already seen the machine's inhuman architecture, he might have guessed the Enlightened Ones built the green wall behind him. Their level of skill could plausibly produce a 4-Specter trap like this. It seemed most likely that the 7 corruptors, the trio of destruction, death, and the Maw had all risen during the era of the Suffering Ones. A fitting name for that age. Some theories placed the nightmare there too, though the evidence was thin. It must have been a nightmare to actually live through. The corruptors, born into that horror, had had an obscene amount of time since to grow into what they now were, far beyond any ordinary peak fallen. Every one of them was bound to have some ability capable of killing 4 Specters. If Nick slipped into the hole right now, he could escape Pride entirely. No matter how powerful she wasn't small enough to follow him through. He eyed the major relay lying by the fallen's side. If I run now, it might warn her off before she even shows herself. He could destroy the relay first and then flee, but the fact that no corruptor had ever been captured or killed spoke to how good they were at staying hidden. She'd likely sense something was wrong and retreat without ever revealing herself. He grew nervous. This was his life on the line. If she attacks before showing herself, I die. Even if she does show herself, I might still die. He wrestled with it, fight or flight, risk or safety, high reward or low, trust or suspicion. Didn't want to take the risk. Staying here in the open meant surrendering control of his own life, trusting it to someone else's hands. He'd already alerted Aegis, and he knew someone from Aegis was nearby, powerful enough to stay hidden from a fallen, which meant at least mid-protector strength, but strong enough to actually stand against Pride. Killing her might take 3 peak protectors. He had no way of knowing if that kind of force was even here. And then there's the other thing. Another second passed. She could be here any moment. If I want out, this is my window. I've already killed a peak demon. Once Aegis notices me running, they'll close in on the fallen too. I've already given plenty. I don't need to give more. I don't need to put my life on the line again. His thoughts stopped cold as old memories surfaced. As a liaison, he'd once been willing to risk his life against people who could have crushed him. Had he needed to? No. When he'd chosen to return to Aegis and reveal himself as a Specter, just as dangerous. Had he needed to do that either? No. And yet both times he had. I haven't redeemed myself yet, he thought. I've helped maybe 200,000 people so far. There are still 800,000 to go. He remembered his own last name. The old champion of light entrusted me with saving all of humanity. Wouldn't dying now be exactly like selling out a Specter would? If I invest more now, I get far more out on the other side. If he'd had a physical jaw, he'd have been gritting his teeth. What is this shit? I'm turning into the very people I swore to kill. I have the power to actually change things, and here I am scraping together excuses not to risk my life. I'm fighting for humanity. Aegis's humanity. I can fight for it, but I can't actually save it without its help. I have to trust humanity. I have to trust Aegis. And if my life ends here, then that trust was misplaced. But at least I'll have died having tried to redeem myself, uncorrupted. I'll stay. His doubts dissolved, and he steeled himself. About 2 minutes later, he felt a crushing pressure descend on the cave. Something emerged from the dark, a tall, slender woman with black hair, her long dress clinging to her frame, her body seeming to half-merge with the shadows around her. Her eyes carried nothing but pride, disregard, and disgust. She stood well over 3 meters tall. Pride? Her attention fixed entirely on Nick. She moved closer without a word, and he felt the pressure on his body climb. He couldn't move at all, like his Specter core was caught in a closing fist. "You're worthless," she said coldly. His core shook, the pressure kept building. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. A little girl appeared in front of Pride, holding a sacrificial dagger. Pride went still, watching her. A black streak sliced across Pride's body. "I'm willing to comply," Pride transmitted. The knife didn't answer. She drove the dagger into her own stomach and dragged it upward, splitting her torso in two. Blood fountained out of her. At the same instant, Pride's body fell apart. Her black Specter core flickered into view, then dissolved into black dust. Pride was dead. The knife was here. War noticed the instant Pride died. The knife was now on the board, and for the next few seconds, nothing else needed to fear her sudden appearance elsewhere. The careful balance of the world's conflicts tipped. 1 second after Pride's death, war broke out across the entire world. Chapter 693. Pride was dead. The knife had killed her. The 7 corruptors had stood for the entire era, thousands of years. None had ever died. Now that had changed. When a Specter died, its body dissolved into black mist, its Zephyx breaking back down into Prefix. The amount released by a peak fallen like Pride was immense, and in an instant the most powerful beings on Earth all felt it happen. About 3,000 kilometers south of where she died stood one of Aegis's strongholds, anchoring its influence over the middle of the long continent. 1 second after Pride's death, something appeared atop the base, over 50 meters wide, 70 meters long, built of shining red metal with treads along 2 edges, a massive cannon rising from its body. This was a tank, one of the Ancient One's oldest weapons, though this specimen dwarfed even the largest of theirs, its brilliant red hull impossible to miss. 2 lights atop it glowed with black radiance, like a pair of eyes. The cannon swung toward the stronghold and fired. Boom! A colossal explosion. The world seemed to catch fire as a second sun bloomed where the stronghold had stood, swallowing even the tank itself. The fireball spanned 20 kilometers of nothing but flame. Few things could unleash that much destruction. The giant red tank was one of them. War? The tank was war, probably the single most devastating attacker among the adversaries, stronger even than death. As the fire consumed the stronghold, elsewhere a black tsunami of smoke rolled across the horizon west of Aegis's headquarters, surging toward it. Whoom! Aegis's headquarters erupted in sunlight, splitting the smoke like a river slamming into a boulder. The champion of light shot free of the building and hung above it, glaring west. A crying face of pure suffering formed within the smoke before more of it surged forward. The light was pushed back, but the champion didn't waver. "I will not let humanity die," he shouted. The sun itself seemed to shimmer. "I will not let humanity die. I will not let humanity die." His words rang out in every corner of the world at once. Every human alive heard it and looked up at the sun together. The champion wouldn't fail them. The champion was their hope. Tiny, near imperceptible rays of light rose from every one of them, streaming toward the sun. Above Aegis's headquarters. Boom! Blinding light erupted. A kilometer-wide pillar of pure white light engulfed the entire base. The champion of light summoned a golden sword and raised it skyward, gathering the light along its edge into a blazing arc. "Humanity will not die today," he roared and slashed downward. Woo-um! A crescent of white light tore through the black smoke like it was nothing, cutting straight through the face within it. The face twisted and dissolved into black mist with a sound like 1,000 screaming souls. The smoke around it weakened and scattered. Elsewhere, the world kept burning. Near the northern edge of the western grand continent stood a ruin of shining metal, the outline of what had once been an enormous building, now stripped to almost nothing. At its center, A red-skinned girl sat crying, hands pressed over her eyes. "I'm still hungry," she sobbed. "Why am I still hungry?" Moments earlier, this had been an Aegis stronghold. The girl was Gluttony, one of the 7 corruptors. She'd consumed it whole. Bang! The sky itself shook as 2 unstoppable forces collided above a stronghold on the war continent. A heavily armored, muscular man burning with rage and hatred, thrown back by the impact. Facing him, an old blind man wearing a bandana exploded outward from the exchange, even as a green light connected his head to a younger man standing nearby, the younger man aging slightly as the blind man's body regenerated. Bang! Wrath had to block another strike from the side, immediately followed by the crack of a sniper rifle. A team of 5 protectors, one of them a peak protector, had been stationed nearby and intercepted him before he could finish the job. He knew he'd failed. Staying longer would only give the shields time to hunt him down. Near a stronghold in the north of the Grand Continent, a bored, exhausted-looking teenage girl with deep black rings under her eyes stared up at a young man hovering above the base, sighed, and vanished. With the technician defending this stronghold, Sloth wasn't getting anywhere. Near the middle of the Grand Continent, impossible powers clashed. A dying zombie dragged a hearse full of rotting corpses through the sky, flanked by a swarm of aggressive locusts numbering well over a trillion. Facing them stood the politician, the left arm and the right arm, trading a few blows without either side fully committing. Pestilence and famine knew they could win a straight fight, but not fast enough. Drawn-out battles favored humanity, which excelled at massing every available soldier onto a single point. Specters were stronger and more numerous overall, but humans always threw at least 3 fighters at any lone Specter, leaving the others with nothing to attack. The knife could already be anywhere. Like war, she could unleash a devastating blow in an instant, and if she caught either of them exposed, the fight would no longer favor them. That was exactly why her location had stayed secret. With her position unknown, no Specter dared fully commit. For a few seconds they'd had a free window to attack, but it was closing now. There would be no more fighting here today. Near the eastern Grand Continent, a fat, acne-scarred man glared at the 5 protectors in front of him, looking ready to throw a tantrum. "You win this time, Chads, but you'll see, we'll rise again," he shouted, jabbing a finger at them, face reddening before he sank into the ground and vanished. Another team of 5 protectors had held this stronghold. Lust hadn't gotten through. In the northeast of the desolate continent, Simon and several other protectors peered down into a massive hole. A starving child at the bottom looked back up, not daring to climb out. Its time would come later. All of this unfolded within 10 seconds. Near the end of those 10 seconds, the fireball over the southern continent's stronghold finally began to fade, revealing an enormous barrier still standing. Ward looked down and saw a tall man collapsing at the stronghold's center, still intact. The wall. He'd been here and he'd blocked War's attack, though it had cost him every drop of his Zephyx. War studied him, ready to fire again, but 10 seconds had already passed plenty of time. The knife might already be closing in. If the wall and the knife combined forces, War would be in serious trouble. In the end, War decided it had done enough damage for one day. Safety mattered more. Specters had infinite time. Another opportunity would come. War vanished. 10 seconds. In that span, thousands of Extractors had died. But except for Pride, not a single Specter had. Chapter 694. The world was in uproar. While all this played out, the knife's body pulled itself back together and regrew. When Pride died, her servant hadn't moved at all. The Fallen knew there was no outrunning something this powerful. Its only hope was that the human wouldn't kill it. 3 seconds after Pride's death, the knife stood fully recovered, looking at the Fallen with a cold expression. "I won't resist," it transmitted. In less than a second, she flung a metallic rope around it, one of Aegis's strongest Zephyx suppressors. Resisting might have let it shrug the thing off easily, but since it hadn't, the suppression took hold completely. Now it made no difference either way. Nick, still in mist form, watched as the knife turned toward him and summoned a large Specter cage. An irresistible force shoved him inside. Bang! The cage door slammed shut. He was captured just like any other Specter, because as far as the knife knew, that's all he was. Well, mostly. She didn't know the mist cloud was Nick, but she did know it was tied to Aegis's unique Specter ally. Only Ghosty and the technician knew the full extent of Nick's abilities. Even the left arm only knew he could turn into mist, not about his primary ability. The knife, the wall, the right arm, the politician, and the champion of light knew nothing about any of it. The left arm had sent Nick to infiltrate Pride's forces without much of a plan beyond trusting his competence, letting him handle the details himself while he sent updates along the way. After killing the robe, his last message to her had read, "I killed a very important servant. I am confident a fallen will appear very soon. There is a small chance that Pride will appear. Be prepared to strike." She never answered. Replying to an undercover agent was always risky, so Nick had no way of knowing who, if anyone, Aegis would send. Given how slim the odds of Pride showing up seemed, a peak protector or a small team would have made sense. Instead, she'd sent the knife. Sitting in his new cage, Nick pieced it together. The left arm gave me the same trust I gave Aegis. I said there was a chance Pride might appear, and she trusted my judgment enough to commit a shield to my mission for several minutes. Normally, a claim like that would draw skepticism. The corruptors were famously careful, and none had ever been captured or killed. Someone claiming one might casually appear with a real shot at killing it, that should have sounded absurd. Yet she'd sent the knife anyway, proof she trusted his read on the situation completely. When he said Pride might show, she believed him and gambled on it, even redistributing her shields around the board. If Pride really did appear and die, the rest of the corruptors and the trio of destruction would likely retaliate across the entire planet. So she'd sent the wall to their stronghold on the long continent, betting war would strike there. It was one of Aegis's most exposed positions, holding only a single stronghold. With Pride gone, the Great Triangle would effectively become humanity's territory, and the Specters needed a foothold there badly, with 2 strongholds already secured, one being headquarters itself. That foothold wasn't happening in the Great Triangle proper. The long continent was the next best option. Envy's forces were still active there, and if that stronghold fell, they could push into the Great Triangle from it. The left arm banked on war reasoning the same way, and sent the wall to intercept. All he needed to do was block a single attack from war, easier said than done. He'd once claimed he believed he could withstand a hit from war, and she'd believed him. Even the champion of light might not survive a direct strike from war, but the wall held the strongest defense on Earth. If he couldn't block it, nobody could. He judged the northwestern stronghold in the Great Triangle was safe for now. Ordinary fallen couldn't mobilize fast enough to exploit Pride's death that quickly. Death, she was certain, would use this moment to test the new champion of light with a strike on headquarters itself. If he couldn't hold, humanity was finished regardless. She also expected gluttony and wrath to hit the 2 strongholds on the war continent, so she sent nearly all her remaining powerful protectors there. Sadly, even the left arm's brilliant strategy wasn't infallible. Gluttony actually struck the western stronghold of the Grand Continent instead, destroying it. 2 protectors, 11 heroes, 51 specialists, more than 300 lesser extractors, and over 1,800 ordinary people had been stationed there, along with over 100 specters, 7 of them demons. The one silver lining, gluttony consumed everything, specters included. She'd positioned the technician in the north of the Grand Continent, expecting Sloth to strike there, and another strong protector team in the east against Lust. That left the stronghold on the southeastern islands undefended. Sending 3 more protectors there wouldn't have been enough to hold against Lust if it attacked, and would have amounted to sacrificing them for nothing. So she left it bare. The 2 remaining strongholds in the Grand Continent were where the real confrontation would unfold. Controlling the middle of that continent would give the Specters a solid foothold over the whole landmass, which was reason enough for them to converge there. But that wasn't the actual reason for the coming clash. All of this territorial maneuvering only mattered as long as neither side could strike directly at the true deciding pieces of the war, the shields and the adversaries. Death had just lost one of its most valuable servants in Pride, a minor key piece in the grand scheme, and intended to use the moment to claim one of humanity's in return. Expecting humanity to defend those 2 Grand Continent strongholds with 1 or 2 shields apiece, it sent 2 adversaries to scout the space between them and jointly crush whichever looked weaker, hoping to remove 1 or 2 shields in the process. But the left arm had planned for exactly that. Knowing Death would try to pick off a shield there, she brought 2 others of her own to the same location. If the enemy split its forces, her side would do exactly what Death had planned, gang up on a single adversary. They might lose 1 or 2 strongholds in the process, but they might also take out a member of the trio of destruction. If the enemy stayed together, her group would still be strong enough to hold out until reinforcements arrived. Without her foresight, Aegis would have lost far more than a single stronghold, likely half its network or worse. And through all of this, she kept Nick's true identity hidden. When she sent the knife, all she'd said was, "Julian Winter has taken a Force Specter as a servant and is using it to lure out Pride. It's a cloud of mist, Capture it and bring it back to headquarters. Do not kill it. Right now, the knife had no idea she just captured Nick himself. Chapter 695. Nick waited in the dark cage. Nothing happened after being sealed inside. Most likely the knife had dropped him off before rushing to help wherever needed her more. Specters couldn't be stored in space bags even inside a Specter cage. There were cages that could compress down to a smaller size, but those tended to be less stable and took time to shrink. The knife preferred the plain, reliable kind. A couple of minutes passed. The Fallen stayed exactly where it was, knowing escape was pointless. Even with hours of freedom, the Zephyx suppressor wouldn't run out in time for it to reclaim its abilities, and if it ran into humans in that state, they might actually capture it, though even then, a standard containment unit was something it could eventually break out of. It put its odds of escape at roughly 20%. If that failed, it would be killed, a possibility not even worth entertaining. Staying still gave it a 99% chance of survival. Growth might stall for a few centuries, but civilizations fell eventually, and given a few thousand years, any containment unit would degrade enough to escape. Getting captured by humans was just a delay, as long as it wasn't fatal. About 30 minutes later, the knife returned. Despite having just achieved the historic feat of killing the first corruptor ever recorded, she looked far from pleased. She extended a hand and pulled the Fallen toward her. It hovered in front of her without ever touching her body. Levitation and basic telekinesis weren't difficult skills for a shield to pick up, though making them combat viable was another matter. With both Specters in tow, she glanced once at the green wall, eyes narrowing, then took a breath and left. The trip back to Aegis headquarters took her less than a minute. People at her level moved at over 200 kilometers per second. The instant she appeared on the roof, she dropped both Specters and vanished again. The fewer times the knife showed her face in public, the safer humanity stayed. The rooftop guards immediately alerted their superior and secured the captives. Some time later, someone stepped out through the main entrance. "Greetings, technician," the guard said, snapping to attention. Yeah, he said, waving them off, and approached the Fallen with open curiosity. It didn't react. "Aren't you a strong one?" he said, smiling. No answer. Mid-Fallen, yes. The massive arms nodded. "You'll feel right at home here," he said, then turned to the Specter cage, pressing a few buttons on its display. Reading the readout, he nodded, lifted the cage with telekinesis, and waved for the Fallen to follow him inside. He escorted the Fallen to its new containment unit, released its Zephyx suppressor, and told it someone would be by shortly to discuss its working relationship with Aegis. Then he carried the Specter cage down to research and development. In his office, he opened it. The cloud of mist drifted out and looked around. He waited for Nick to say something. Nothing came. He blinked, confused, before his eyes widened with realization. "Oh yeah, wait a sec." He summoned his barrier, which flared solid white, blocking all view through it for a moment before clearing again. "Xing." Nick shifted back into human form. Since the technician already knew about Nick's ability, he made a habit of using it. Nick's unique perception outstripped even the technician's own senses in certain ways. Not even the technician could tell if Death or the Champion of Light was watching him at any given moment. Nick could. He'd felt his own ability deactivate the moment the new Champion of Light rose to power, after all, which made him the best tool available for checking whether some shield was secretly observing them. The technician had briefly used his barrier to isolate his own senses, nothing suspicious to any onlooker, since researchers ran strange experiments all the time. If someone really was watching and the cloud hadn't reacted, he'd simply play it off as a recording mishap. "So I take it things went well," he said, smiling. Nick nodded. "I didn't expect the left arm to send the knife." "Guess she trusts you, as much as someone like her trusts anyone." "How much did we lose?" The technician wasn't supposed to share this, but the two of them were close enough. "We lost the western stronghold of the Grand Continent." And that's it," he said, smirking. Nick's brows shot up. "That's bearable." "I'd call it more than bearable," the technician said, chuckling. "It's a miracle." Nick could only nod. Pride's death must have triggered a massive counterattack from the Specters, probably the largest offensive from Death's forces in 1,000 years, and losing only one stronghold to it was almost unbelievable. With Pride gone, nearly all of her organized forces across the Great Triangle would collapse into chaos. Demons and fanatics who'd served her would suddenly be free agents, most of them now operating alone. Some would turn more aggressive without an organization's restraint. Others would grow more cautious, sticking to safe, isolated targets, since infiltrating a city alone was a risk most Specters weren't eager to take. Humanity had gained real ground today. War now had only 4 real options for the Great Triangle. Send a weaker general than Pride since it lacked a stronger replacement. Abandon the region for now and focus on Wrath. Cede it to Envy, boosting the Alliance's collective strength while diminishing its own, or manage it personally. None of these were good choices. Managing it directly would give Aegis far more chances to track war's movements. Part of the whole point of using corruptors as generals in the first place was that they, not the trio of destruction, took the exposure. Communication between a member of the trio and a corruptor happened at such a high level, and from such isolated locations that it was nearly untraceable. But a corruptor had to coordinate with hundreds of Specters scattered worldwide, and each of those signals was far easier to intercept. The fact that Aegis headquarters also happened to sit on that same continent only made it riskier. With Pride dead, the haze obscuring war's presence there had thinned considerably. Over the next few minutes, Nick reported everything he'd done to damage Pride's forces, and the technician took notes. Most of what remained of her network would splinter into petty local warlords, but they still needed hunting down regardless of her death. The technician laughed more than once at how Nick had managed to kill a Specter through the dumbest possible chain of reasoning, and walked away clean. "You got chased by a peak demon," he asked, incredulous, "and you're still alive." Nick nodded. "I found something." The technician's interest sharpened. "Yes." Chapter 696. "While fleeing from the robe, I found a green wall," Nick said. "A green wall, like from some ruin?" "I don't think so. It had strange properties, looks perfectly smooth from a distance, but touch it and you can feel it's riddled with holes, and it's made of some material I've never seen before. I know a lot about the past civilizations and none of it matched. It's also hard enough that not even a fallen could break it." The technician's expression sobered. Nick noted the shift as unusual. Normally he was chipper, endlessly curious, and should have been fascinated by something this strange. Instead, he looked like he wanted nothing to do with it. He already knows about this, Nick realized, and let the silence stretch, making it clear he'd noticed. "It's a special ruin from the ancient ones," the technician said. "They weren't as unified as people assume. Different regions developed different cultures and technology over time. What you found was one of their bunkers. The holes let material pass between the inside and outside, basically a filter." His tone was distant, nothing like his usual casual delivery. Nick, having actually seen what was inside, knew immediately it was a lie. And despite his age and experience, the technician wasn't a particularly smooth liar. He usually prepared a story in advance or brushed things off with a quick joke, since the more he talked, the more likely a lie would unravel. But this time he seemed to be improvising, off script. Was lying necessarily bad, though? Why is he lying? Nick wondered. Protecting someone, himself, me. "You know I can turn into mist," Nick said. A flicker of something, shock, curiosity, broke through the technician's composure before he suppressed it. "Handy ability to have," was all he said. Silence. He didn't ask what Nick had actually seen. "You know I can sense if someone's spying on us," Nick said. "You don't need to be this careful. No one's watching." The technician's jaw tightened. "Can you guarantee the sun isn't watching?" "Even if I can't, we can go somewhere dark if that's the concern." He grew visibly more agitated. "Don't look into this, Nick. I don't know what you saw in there and I don't want to know." Nick frowned. This was strange behavior. Nobody can sense. "Can you guarantee that?" The technician cut in, then pressed a button without waiting for an answer. "Nobody can sense." Nick's own voice played back from a recording. "Did you sense that?" he asked, annoyed, then pulled up a video feed on one of his consoles, replaying their entire conversation. "Can you guarantee nobody started watching us since we sat down? Your ability is binary. The instant I'm perceiving you, it stops working on me entirely." He gritted his teeth, isolated his senses through his barrier once more, and looked at Nick, who nodded. "Nobody watching." "This involves secrets far more important than your survival or your abilities," the technician transmitted rapidly. "If the wrong people learn you got inside one of these things, we'll have a 6th civilization on our hands. Don't tell anyone about this, not Ghosty, not the left arm, not me, not anyone." His glare bored into Nick, who barely managed to keep his own reaction off his face. "So how do we handle things now that Pride's dead?" Nick asked, casual. The technician exhaled and his smile returned. "We're still working that out. A dead corruptor is unprecedented. We're trying to make the most of it." As the conversation continued, Nick turned the technician's words over privately. A 6th era. The implication was obvious. If the wrong party learned Nick had brushed up against these secrets, the current era of humanity would simply end. Every powerful figure on Earth would die. Aegis would cease to exist. Nearly every city on the planet would be wiped out, all because of something Nick had stumbled onto. This sounds almost like the Null, he thought, except the Null only kills people who learn its secret. This would kill all of humanity. The technician knows I can sense the champion of light watching us. I'm fairly sure I can sense an Eternal's gaze too. My ability kept deactivating the whole time I was inside the mall. But he specifically brought up the sun. As the conversation wound on, Nick kept turning it over. The sun is unmistakably the strongest Specter. Based on everything I've seen, it might genuinely be some kind of super Specter with every other Specter as its minion, maybe even a theoretical 10th level, above the Eternals. The only time my abilities ever deactivated because of the sun was when the new champion of light rose. But was that really the sun's perception, or just the champion's? It's possible the sun has been watching me this whole time, and my ability simply doesn't register it at all. If it really is superior to every other Specter, it's superior to the Null too. It would make sense for it to be immune to my ability outright. I've always assumed the sun was unconscious, since my ability never deactivated around it, but that assumption might be wrong. It could be fully conscious, watching, and simply choosing not to interact with me at all. But if these secrets were that critical, and the sun really has been watching all along, I should already be dead for walking into that green building. And I'm not. So either the sun is conscious but not paying constant attention to me, or it's conscious but doesn't actually care about this particular secret, or it isn't conscious at all. I don't have enough to settle it yet. Then something else caught his attention. If the sun were really the concern, why did he ask me to recheck for watchers at all? If I can't sense the sun anyway, that check wouldn't mean anything. He studied the technician, still rattling off tactical filler. He's being deliberately vague, and he once told me, in a strange way, to trust Aegis, just saying that it all was suspicious in hindsight. Does he think someone inside Aegis is connected to this? It's possible, but what would even be the point? The Specters want humanity dead. No matter what anyone tells themselves, a traitor is still human. It's one thing for some random governor to cut a deal with a Specter. A destroyed city doesn't end humanity, there are always more cities. But when it's the leaders of humanity itself, there's nowhere left to go. If every human dies, the traitor dies too, and I doubt the shields are too dense to understand that. So why any of this? He mulled it over. I can't be sure yet. All I can accept is that someone inside Aegis might not actually be on humanity's side. Chapter 697. Report, the champion of light's deep voice commanded. Nick nodded. Once again, everyone had gathered in his hall for an emergency conference, all because of Pride's death, and Nick, as the one responsible for it, had been called to explain. In the past, he'd avoided lying to anyone this powerful, terrified of being caught. Now he had no choice. If the shields learned he was a physical Specter who could transform into an intelligent force Specter at will, they'd immediately recognize how abnormal that was, a combination not even found among adversaries. The closest thing was famine, a cloud of trillions of locusts that moved as one, mimicking a force Specter's behavior through sheer numbers, but famine was still made of individual bodies bound into a hivement. Kill every locust, and famine died. Nick, by contrast, was essentially nothing at all. He could create and destroy pieces of his own body at will, so long as he had Zephyx. Not even the known Eternals were true intelligent force Specters. People once suspected the Nightmare might be one, but that had been disproven. The only remaining candidate was the Null, and even that wasn't certain. 100 rooms checked for mice, 99 coming up empty, didn't guarantee a mouse in the last one. There'd never been solid evidence of an intelligent force Specter existing at all, and no reason to assume the one unknown Specter out there happened to be it. So Nick would stand out, and standing out invited questions that would eventually lead straight to his real identity. He had to lie, dangerous as that was in front of this many powerful people. He just hoped it held up. I have a servant I've raised and trained for years, he said. A force Specter with roughly the intelligence of a common pet. A few suspicious glances turned his way. Whether from surprise at the pet force Specter or doubt about his honesty, he couldn't tell. Since my identity's already tied to Wrath, I couldn't infiltrate Pride's forces personally, so I used it instead. The politician frowned. And how did you keep control of your servant in front of a corruptor? By exploiting a flaw in its instincts, Nick answered. At the politician's silent prompt, he elaborated. I've proven over and over that I can kill it. I threatened its core repeatedly over the years, staged dangerous situations it was always meant to survive, and then reminded it afterward that I was the real threat all along. No matter what happened to it elsewhere, it always had some chance of survival, except in front of me. Instinctively, something like pride should terrify it far more than I do, but it's learned that everything else carries some uncertainty. I don't. Defying me means certain death. Defying anyone else just means death isn't guaranteed. While it met with pride, I stayed well clear, since I knew it would sense me nearby. I only made contact with it inside cities or while it traveled between them. The shields listened, suspicion still visible on their faces. Right, I'm not powerful enough yet to sell a lie outright. They know something's off. For a while they simply studied him, clearly exchanging thoughts over private transmission. Is there anything you're keeping from us? The champion of light finally asked. Yes. The knife in the politician's frowns deepened. The wall and the right arm's brows rose. Why? Because my hands aren't clean enough to shake yours, Nick said. The shields understood immediately what he meant. Before anyone asks, he continued, cutting them off, consider what these methods have already achieved. People say the ends don't justify the means, but does anyone really get to weigh ethics so carefully when humanity's survival is the stake? Nobody answered right away. Do not break Aegis's code of conduct again. This is your only warning, the champion said with full authority. Of course, it won't happen again. The champion nodded and gestured for him to continue. It was theater, and everyone knew it. The fact that nobody pressed for specifics meant they were quietly condoning whatever he'd done. The warning was for appearances. As long as Nick kept delivering results, they wouldn't dig too hard into his methods. He continued spinning his account of the mission under pride, and the shields grew visibly less suspicious as he went exactly as he'd planned. He'd known there was no way to get through this conversation on half-truths alone. His identity was too tangled up with his servants. So he lied outright, expecting them to notice. But by giving them a plausible reason for the lie, he let them believe they already understood what he was hiding. From now on, whenever he lied, they'd most likely assume he was covering up killing loyal extractors to earn pride's trust, something none of them expected him to admit outright, hence the lying. That assumption gave him room to maneuver, but he still had to place his lies carefully. A lie about relocating to a city would raise flags, since there was no obvious reason to hide that. A lie about avoiding casualties entirely in a city, though, was expected. He had to weave the truth and the falsehoods together with real precision, extracting the important information while attaching his lies to plausible cover stories about deaths he supposedly caused. It wasn't an easy conversation to navigate. How did you manage to lure pride into the mountains? Everyone glanced at the knife, who just cut in while Nick was describing his servant fleeing the robe. If the room hadn't been distracted by her interruption, they'd have caught his brow twitch. She wants me to lie about where pride actually died, he realized. The knife met his eyes with an easy, casual expression. She just said something genuinely risky. If he were careless enough to correct her, the room would grow suspicious. Had she forgotten where she'd assassinated pride? And if he weren't trustworthy, correcting her was exactly the kind of thing he might do. Let me finish, Nick said instead. I was getting to that. She nodded. The technician and the left arm showed nothing outwardly, but Nick could tell they'd caught what just happened. The left arm knew he'd been in some kind of cave. The technician knew about the green wall. The left arm probably hadn't been briefed on the wall itself, but the knife and the technician clearly had. The left arm knew the knife had just asked him to lie. Nick just didn't know if she understood why. Either way, neither of them exposed it. The knife just quietly revealed herself to whoever's on my side, Nick thought. She clearly understands how significant the green wall is, or she wouldn't need me to lie about it. I was already planning to leave it out of my report. She seems just as determined that nobody learns I saw it. She wants it kept secret, and by asking me to cover for that, she's exposed herself to my allies. If she's acting this way too, my suspicions are basically confirmed. There's a traitor among us. Chapter 698. Nick kept lying, though the knife's interjection made it harder. He'd originally planned to say he lured Pride into a cave in a basin. Now he had to relocate her death to the mountains instead. That's how I assassinated the robe, he said, describing how he'd snuck up from behind, watched it attack his servant, located its Specter core, and destroyed it in one devastating strike. The shields didn't press much further. They already knew he was being deliberately vague about his powers. You genuinely have the strength to kill a mid-demon like that? The right arm asked. Nick had claimed the robe was a mid-demon. Yes, in an open fight I might lose. In an assassination I'd most likely win. That much was true. The shields were no strangers to remarkable feats of power. Every one of them had killed something several stages above their own at some point. But stories like Nick's were normally the kind only the knife could match, given her whole power revolved around stealth, speed, and overwhelming force. She likely couldn't beat another shield in an open fight, but given the chance to strike from hiding, she could kill any of them, possibly even the champion of light. Like war, she only needed one real opening to win. Nick wasn't quite her equal in that regard. He had no signature devastating attack, just an overwhelming barrage of ordinary strikes. No poison, no bleed effect, no penetration gimmick, nothing like the explosive rounds, Zephyx drains, or fireballs other extractors carried. That was also exactly why he was nearly useless against a force Specter. The knife's real killing power, by contrast, came from an ability she'd built up over many compatible upgrades. Any injury she inflicted on an enemy could be mirrored and amplified through her own body. She cut through Pride's torso, then stabbed and tore open her own, and the resulting damage transferred back to Pride at a modified, far more severe scale. Her own wound had worsened by more than tenfold. Pride's, given the difference in their baseline durability, had been catastrophic. There were limits. The target's relative power mattered a great deal, and she also needed abilities that amplified her initial strike, or she'd never do more than scratch a Specter in the first place. That Nick's assassination feats could even be compared to hers genuinely startled the shields. They wanted to know how he'd gotten this strong, but knew they wouldn't get a straight answer. They'd already asked once before, and he'd simply said he relied on human weapons and extensive human training. In a way, it made sense that he'd be powerful, straddling both worlds, a bear with a human brain. But the scale of the gap still surprised them. Somehow, Nick talked his way to the crucial part. "I suspected Pride might show up because of an earlier run-in with Wrath," he said, which caught everyone's attention. The shields had fought the corruptors for centuries without ever really encountering them directly. There was no diplomacy between the sides, and any shield who managed real contact with one would likely track and kill it, which made face-to-face meetings essentially impossible for them. Nick, by contrast, had seen and heard more of the corruptors firsthand than every shield in the room combined. "When I worked with Wrath, he was constantly angry, for no clear reason, practically impossible to talk to without setting him off," Nick said. "I think the corruptors are like me, specters with abnormal mental states, probably feeling something tied directly to their names. Killing my servant myself would have been all risk and no reward, but I gambled that the way it sabotaged Pride would humiliate her, and that she might not have another servant capable of killing it. Even so, I only ever said there was a small chance." The right arm turned to the left arm. "And you believed that?" "Not entirely," she said, "but we needed something to break the status quo. We've fought the 7 corruptors for centuries without real progress. Cities won and lost look meaningful on paper, but the game itself never really moves. I was willing to take the gamble." The other shields stayed quiet for a moment. Most of them wouldn't have committed something as valuable as the knife to such long odds, and yet the payoff had clearly been enormous. Nick's report ended there. The rest was the knife's story to tell. "You've done humanity a great service," the champion of light said after a while. "Investing in you doesn't appear to have been a mistake. I'll grant you further freedom in how you act and contribute going forward." Nick bowed. "Thank you, champion." The champion turned to the technician. "I still want you supervising it and continuing your research." "Sure thing." Then to the left arm. "You may deploy the Specter on missions without needing my explicit approval from now on." "Thank you, champion," she said. Finally to Nick, "You may go." He bowed once more and left. He made his way down to research and development and waited. The technician arrived nearly an hour later, looking worn out. "Any news?" Nick asked. The technician glanced at him, then pressed the button that briefly cut off his own senses. "Okay," Nick said once he reappeared. "And why did you do that?" "Wasn't on purpose," the technician muttered, expression unchanged. That question was their code word. It meant they were being watched. Nick's ability hadn't triggered while the technician's senses were blocked, which meant someone had been observing them the whole time. Neither of them could tell who, which narrowed it to 2 people, the champion of light or the knife. "Let me try again," the technician said and vanished for a moment. This time, Nick's ability activated. "Safe," he said. "Not safe enough," a voice said from the shadows. Nick's brows shot up, though the technician looked entirely unsurprised. A young girl materialized in the office. "The knife?" Nick eyed her with mild interest. "I take it you're willing to join in." "You know I'm a child," she said, disgusted. The technician snickered. "You know what I meant," Nick said flatly. She rolled her eyes. It was a joke. Loosen up, will you? And hey, aren't you being a little too casual with me? I'm a shield. A little respect wouldn't kill you, she huffed, sounding every bit the sulking little girl. Nick blinked. You're telling me to loosen up and be more respectful in the same breath. Yeah, that's the joke, dumbass. She turned to the technician, jabbing a thumb at Nick. You work with this guy. Oh, he's not so bad, the technician said, settling into one of his office chairs. How much do you know? Nick asked, trying to steer things back. Dunno, she said, dropping into a chair and kicking her feet up on the table. How much do you know? Nick just blinked slowly. Chapter 699. She knows you've worked with us a long time and that you're on our side, the technician said, clearly amused. She also knows you have some ability that lets you sense people by presence. So in short, she knows nothing, Nick thought. Who'd have guessed there was a Specter with such a weird ability, the knife said, rocking her chair back on two legs. Sensing presence is about as pure a form of perception as it gets. You noticed me the second I walked in, but the moment I slipped out of the room, you lost me completely. Crazy. It's not perfect, Nick said. Sure isn't, she agreed. Silence. So I take it we're allies now, Nick said. Depends which side you're actually on, she said. Forgive me if I'm not fully sold on a Specter caring about humanity's success. Why wouldn't I? Same reason it'd be pointless for any human to help the Specters, she said. And yet here we are. The technician shot her a sharp look. Well, that confirms it, Nick thought. Neither the technician nor the left arm had ever said outright that a human was working with the Specters, but the knife just had. Whoops, she said, feigning innocence. Guess I wasn't supposed to say that. Wasn't hard to guess already, Nick said. I'd already worked it out. The technician sighed, clearly blaming himself. He was the one who'd kept dropping hints Nick shouldn't have caught. Nick wasn't strong enough yet to lie convincingly in front of the shields, and if he knew about the traitor, there was a real risk the traitor would sense they'd been found out. Everyone knew how that would end. There were tiers to understanding the world. The uninformed believed humanity was helpless against the Specters. The experienced knew Aegis could actually resist them, but the truly powerful knew the real truth. Humanity only survived because the Specters allowed it to. Right now, 80 to 90% of Specters acted alone, with no systematic hostility toward humans, not out of mercy, but because they didn't need to bother. Other Specters were already keeping humanity too weak to properly fight back. As long as there was a metaphorical gun to humanity's head, there was no reason for the rest to get involved. And the identity of that gun wasn't hard to guess. The champion of light. His sudden rise, his alliance with the sun, his complete lack of a background, an early shield who came from nowhere and was instantly the most powerful human alive. Humanity couldn't have produced someone like that on its own. He'd needed help from something far more powerful, and that something wasn't hard to identify either, given his ability came directly from it. The sun. The sun was humanity's enemy. By Nick's theory, it created and controlled every Specter in existence. The sun doesn't want humanity destroyed, he thought. It clearly has the power to wipe every human off the map. The piles of ash in the old ruins prove that much. And yet it doesn't. It wants us alive, but it doesn't want us uncontrolled either. It wants us fighting for survival, fighting the Specters. If Ghosty's theory holds, the sun grows stronger from suffering, and every other Specter is its instrument. The stronger humanity gets, the more valuable the suffering it produces becomes. That fixes the biggest hole in Ghosty's theory, the existence of prefix and our ability to absorb it. We take in prefix to make human Zephyx. Causing suffering to humans holding a lot of that Zephyx produces more Specter Zephyx in turn, and the sun almost certainly takes a large cut of whatever gets made. Its power keeps growing. The rising density of prefix proves that. Specters die, their Zephyx reverts to prefix, that spawns more Specters, and those Specters grow stronger again. The total prefix locked up as Specter Zephyx keeps climbing without the raw prefix ever dropping, meaning the total amount, in every form, keeps increasing. That means this isn't a closed system. Somehow the sun is converting something from outside into prefix and feeding it into Earth's atmosphere through those machines. Based on what I saw, the bright white light feeding into the machine is the actual source, though I don't know how the sun generates it. You can't just create more energy out of nothing. If energy enters a system, it has to come from somewhere else. Maybe the sun uses the Zephyx it's generated to acquire materials from outside this world and convert those into prefix. Turning something worthless into something valuable, then using that value to buy more worthless material to convert again, like buying iron ore, forging it into steel. then selling the steel to buy more ore. His eyes narrowed, and every few thousand years, once the Zephyx density hits some threshold, it harvests all the strongest humans. The rate prefix keeps rising is far too fast. Specters can't have been growing steadily more powerful for tens of thousands of years, or they'd already be unstoppable. A large share of them must get periodically harvested too, leaving only the most Zephyx productive ones behind. Decades of investigation were finally clicking into place. Then something else surfaced. The Zephyx beneath the nightmare. An endless reservoir of it sitting below that thing. Since the nightmare doesn't seem alive or sentient, it can't be using that Zephyx itself, yet it keeps producing more. It's probably some kind of machine that spends a little Zephyx to cause suffering, generating far more in return, all of it pooling around it like a reservoir, harvested every few thousand years. And if the sun placed it there deliberately, its purpose makes more sense too. Making the dark genuinely dangerous keeps everyone huddled in the light, where nothing can spiral out of control. That led him to think about the different eras. The sun's supremely powerful, why would it still need the nightmare to keep people in its light? Just standing in the light shouldn't cause suffering on its own. The only reason I can think of is that it wants to watch everyone constantly, and that only matters if humans becoming dangerous is actually a real concern. So did something like that happen before? He pictured Earth as a sealed bottle running a chemical reaction, three forces inside, all interacting. Prefix, human Zephyx, Specter Zephyx. If something went wrong and only prefix remained, the reaction simply stopped. Same if only Specter Zephyx remained. But if only human Zephyx remained, the bottle would explode. Human Zephyx was the only one of the three that could actively destroy its own container. Then he remembered the image from the Ancient One's ruin, a ball surrounded by a circle. The ball is Earth. The circle is the bottle, the thing containing everything. He thought about how the sun always sat directly above everyone's head. It couldn't literally exist in every location at once, unless he thought of it like a mirror image. Look up at a mirror and your reflection always appears directly above you, no matter where you stand. The circle around Earth, the sun always overhead, the bottle, an experiment, the fact that humans died the instant they climbed above 30 kilometers. The sun isn't some burning ball of fire hanging above us. The sun is some kind of shield, a force field wrapped around the entire Earth. Chapter 700. Everything finally made sense. Every scattered fact Nick had gathered over his lifetime clicked into a single picture. All it had taken was confirmation that a traitor existed among the shields, one clue, and the rest fell into place. Though maybe not quite everything. Where did the sun even come from? It must have appeared sometime during the era of the Ancient Ones, but I don't know enough about them to answer that. Their power is visible everywhere, in the ruins of steel scattered across the world, but almost nothing survives in writing. They shaped the planet more than anyone, and we know less about them than any other era. We do know they were the most powerful civilization in some absolute sense, capable of destroying entire worlds. Records suggest they could carve chunks out of the Earth itself, 1,000 kilometers in radius, leaving the planet looking like something had taken a bite out of it. Not even an Eternal could manage that kind of power. If war became an Eternal and unleashed everything, it might create a fireball 100 kilometers across, and that would still fall far short of what the Ancient Ones achieved with mere technology. Matching that would take war reaching some theoretical 10th level. So how did the sun kill a civilization like that? They'd only have needed to fire one of those weapons at the force field around Earth, and it would have collapsed, probably killing the sun with it. It obviously killed the Ancient Ones by targeting them directly instead, likely some massive radiation burst turning every human to ash. But a civilization with weapons that advanced should have had equally advanced ways of detecting incoming threats. A force field that massive couldn't have appeared instantly. They should have had time to destroy it before it ever closed around the planet. I can't find an answer to that. Even knowing what the sun actually is now, I still don't have the whole picture. There's more to this. Nick looked over at the knife, who was watching him with raised eyebrows. He'd gone quiet for several seconds after her mention of the traitor. "That's surprising," she asked. The technician, who'd known Nick far longer, could clearly see him working through something. How much do they actually know? Nick wondered, studying the two shields. More than they're telling me. They probably already know everything about the sun, including whatever I still don't. He looked at the technician, lifted a finger, and drew a circle surrounded by another circle in the air. "I saw this once in an Ancient One's ruin. I think I understand what it means now." The technician didn't respond. "The inner circle is Earth and..." Yes, yes, the technician cut in. It's the altitude limit, cross it and the sun kills you. His face stayed neutral, but Nick caught the urgency in his eyes. Don't say more. The message landed clearly. Nick had essentially told him he understood what the sun really was, and the technician had cut him off before he could say it aloud. The knife leaned back too far in her chair and nearly toppled over. Damn, I figured you knew things, but knowing that is a whole different level, she said, impressed. Guess I got a little careless, she added with an awkward laugh, glancing at the technician. Oopsie. He just sighed. Do you know what the speed of information is? He asked Nick. No. Picture two particles that are intrinsically linked create one, the other appears two. Destroy one, the other's destroyed the same instant. Now put them a light second apart and destroy one. When does the other die? Nick considered it, by your own rules at the same time. This isn't a hypothetical, it's a real, repeatable experiment, the technician said, holding up one finger. 1 second. It takes exactly 1 second for the other to go. How does that make sense? You just said they'd be simultaneous. They are, but the information that it happened can't travel faster than light. See what I'm getting at? Nick shook his head, unsure. If there's a speed limit on information, then information itself is real, not some abstract idea we invented, but an actual physical thing. And if it's physical, it can be measured. It's not so crazy to think a specific piece of information could trigger a specific kind of alarm, is it? Think about Nurse Alice. Nick did. He was nearly certain she wasn't immune to his ability. He'd sense it if she ever focused on him. Since his ability was essentially always running, and she never registered, that meant she wasn't sensing him either. And yet if he, or anyone near him, spoke the sentence, he was certain she'd notice instantly. It's like a spider's web, he realized. The net covers everything, but the spider only really notices when something's actually caught in it. Nurse Alice must have some way to scan the world for one specific trigger phrase, the sentence. His eyes narrowed. So why couldn't the sun do the same? If something specific gets said about it, maybe that triggers a response, and everyone involved dies. That led him straight to the null. Same principle. It can probably sense anyone who learns something about it. He remembered it had let him live once before, which means it's probably not intelligent. Is the null just a force specter running on instinct? Do you see what I'm getting at? The technician asked, pulling him out of his thoughts. Nick nodded. That's why you've all been so careful about this. I decided it was worth the risk to explain the information thing now, since you accidentally saying the wrong thing could cause far more damage than you knowing about it. The technician sighed. I just hope this hasn't already been enough to set off the envious researcher. Nick's eyes widened. That finally explained why they hadn't even wanted to explain why they wouldn't explain. So the speed of information concept isn't public knowledge yet. Anyone new who learns it might be enough to trigger the envious researcher. Though I think the technician's forgetting something. Wait, the knife said, brow raised. You're worried about the envious researcher. Why? What do you mean, why? I don't want him dying to it. She looked even more confused. What the fuck are you even talking about? She jabbed a finger at Nick. He's a fucking Specter, dumbfuck. How's he supposed to trigger the envious researcher? The technician started, then stopped. He blinked a few times. He said. Would you look at that? Completely forgot about that. Sometimes the most obvious things were the easiest to miss, especially when you were just going through the same motions again and again. The knife rolled her eyes. Nick raised an eyebrow at the technician. Yeah, sorry, my bad, the technician said, scratching the back of his head sheepishly.